Chapter 519. After all, it mainly sucked blood and energy. Zombies were trash to it. It would be better to use them to please its boss. Dehua was very satisfied with Little Red's tactfulness. It didn't take in this little brother for nothing. The two flowers swept through the area quickly. After Dehua leveled up, it ate more and more things. It only ate, but it didn't grow. It didn't even know whose stomach it ate. By the time Qin Zishi and the others arrived, Dehua had already started cleaning up the area. It didn't let go of the broken limbs on the ground. It only cared about stuffing them into its stomach. It looked very ferocious. Xiaoqing also knew a little bird language. She went forward to communicate with the two foreigners. The two foreigners took the lead and held Xiaoqing's hand. "Oh God, we must have met an angel. An angel from the east. Thank you for saving us. Otherwise, we would have become the feces in the zombies' stomachs." Xiaoqing was stunned. Then she said, "You're welcome." Before she could ask anything, the hospitable and grateful foreigners had already insisted on inviting Xiaoqing to their base as a guest. Since the goal had been achieved, the process didn't matter. Xiaoqing thought to herself expressionlessly. She waved her hand and brought her friends, and a group of people who were dragging her down to follow the two foreigners. Among the two foreigners, the man was a chatterbox. He talked a lot along the way. Xiaoqing didn't need to ask for any information at all. He had already delivered himself to her door. First, Xiaoqing knew their names. However, because it was too complicated, she couldn't remember them. But that wasn't the key. She could call them Man A and Woman B for the time being. The situation in Country M was worse than they had imagined. 3 months ago, an expedition team found a giant hive in the forest that was similar to a beehive, but much larger than a beehive. The nature of Country M's adventurous made them unable to resist the temptation to go in and explore. However, the truth was that they had provoked a demon. The outside of the hive looked very old. After entering, they immediately smelled a faint fishy and foul smell. The light became dimmer, and the stench became stronger. There were also cracking sounds under their feet. Someone turned on a flashlight and shone it on the ground. They found that the ground was filled with white bones. Some belonged to animals and some belonged to humans. At this time, the few of them were already a little scared, but they still mustered up their courage to go deeper. The deeper they went, the stronger the stench became. Then, in the center of the nest, they found a huge pool that was so red that it was almost black, and in the middle of the pool was a large cocoon. They thought that they had discovered a treasure. As they cheered, they prepared to step forward and drag the cocoon back. But the moment they approached, the cocoon broke. Furry worm legs extended out of the cocoon. The last thing to crawl out was a huge queen bee. The 3 of them woke up from the shock, but it was too late to run. 2 of them were quickly pierced through the waist by the sharp end of the queen bee's leg. One of them ran faster. He hurriedly looked back and found that the queen bee had already pierced the stinger into one of the people's bodies. The round eggs were constantly being discharged into the person's body. Not long after, young poisonous wasps came out from under the person's skin. His hair stood on end, and he quickened his pace to leave. After he left, he told the story to others, but very few people believed him. Who would have thought that this was just the beginning? Not long after, black beetles, poisonous bees that liked to eat people, and marching ants crawled out of the forest. They were much more terrifying than zombies. Wherever they passed, not to mention survivors, not even plants survived. Scorched earth and wreckage. The M country immediately organized people to resist. They found that the poisonous bees and marching ants were afraid of fire. This should be the nature of insects. But the black beetles were not afraid of anything. They could even devour abilities. Their shells were extremely hard. They could sneak into the city through the walls and eat people into empty shells or piles of bones. Moreover, the poisonous bees and marching ants were limited in their fear of fire. In the entire M country, because of these 3 insects, the number of survivors sharply decreased in a short period of time. Especially in this season, it was the time for the poisonous bees to lay eggs. It was unknown how many people were parasitized. Their bodies were full of poisonous bee eggs, and finally, they were eaten by the little poisonous bees that broke out of their shells. The M Country's Research Institute also did research day and night. trying to find the weaknesses of these insects, their natural enemies, and invent something to deal with them. But the fact was that humans were losing ground. At least so far, that thing had not been invented. Chapter 520. The American people retreated and finally gave up the survivor bases on the edge. They all gathered in the center, where there were only 3 large bases left. Apart from these 3 survivor bases, there were very few other bases left. That was why they had not found a single survivor base after walking for so long. In addition to these 3 major survivor bases, there were many individual households in the American. They often lived in remote areas, with a family or 1 or 2 people living together. They were self-sufficient. It was not similar to the current situation in the Celestial Empire. Under the enthusiasm of the 2 foreigners, a group of people went together. The place they were now at was a little far from the nearest base. Xiaoqing asked them, "Do you know any bases with more people in China?" Manet immediately said, "Oh, of course I know. The original Chinatown survivor base was established after the Doomsday. It is very powerful. Even now it is one of the only 3 survivor bases. Do you want to go there?" Xiaoqing nodded. It was said that these overseas Chinese had contacted the capital and wanted to return to China. They came here partly because of this. Manet hesitated for a while and said, "Well, I will take you there. I know people there. Now the Chinatown survivor base is under martial law. Ordinary people can't enter." "Thank you." Xiaoqing thanked him seriously. Then they went in the direction of the Chinatown survivor base. One day was obviously not enough for them to walk to the Chinatown survivor base, so they had to camp at noon and night. Noon was short. Originally, it was enough to deal with it, but there was one who liked to take a nap. That was Air Dai. For some reason, Air Dai was very sleepy recently, and the amount of crystal nuclei he absorbed every day had greatly increased. Xiaoqing laughed at him. "You are eating more and more. If you continue like this, I won't be able to feed you sooner or later." She took out all the high-level crystal nuclei and gave them to Air Dai. In the past, Air Dai didn't sleep during the day or night. Now he didn't sleep during the day. When he stopped, Xiaoqing would cook. When she finished, she would look back and see that he had already nodded and fallen asleep. Xiaoqing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The only thing she could do was to drag everyone to take an afternoon nap. "What? Unwilling to sleep? What? Do you think napping is a waste of time? What? Did he have to leave? Come, let's exchange some pointers. It just so happens that my hands have been itching recently." After the sparring session with Thornhead, no one else raised any objections. Xiaoqing felt that she was very democratic. Manet and Woman B were new to the team. They didn't know how cruel Xiaoqing was. They were closer to their savior Xiaoqing. When Xiaoqing was cooking at noon, they kindly provided some ingredients, which were from poisonous bees. Although these poisonous bees were good at killing people, they were even better at making honey. The queen bee needed a lot of energy to lay eggs. For the queen bee, the best thing was human flesh and blood, which could provide a lot of energy. The only thing that belonged to human flesh and blood was nectar. Those worker bees often accumulated a lot of nectar in the pool in the nest. The bloody pool that the explorers saw was actually the nectar that had been deposited for a long time. What the 2 foreigners provided was nectar. This nectar was obtained from the stomachs of poisonous bees. There was a small amount of it, but it was much sweeter than normal honey. Chapter 521. Xiaoqing made honey chicken drumsticks and chicken wings. Because the 2 men provided some raw materials, Xiaoqing let them eat together. Xiaoqing's culinary skills instantly conquered the 2 foreigners. They ate until their eyes were brimming with tears. They had probably not eaten such good food since the apocalypse. Furthermore, the culinary skills of the Chinese people, which had been accumulated for 5,000 years, was not something that the United States could compare with. The 2 foreigners' expressions were probably very eager to hug Xiaoqing's thighs and beg her to take them away. What were people born for? Wasn't it just to eat well, wear warm clothes and satisfy their little needs? In this post-apocalyptic world, let's not talk about clothes first. At least they could eat well if they followed Xiaoqing. Unfortunately, Xiaoqing was not going to accept the 2 foreigners as her followers. She left after finishing her business. She couldn't just leave them here and take them back. Not to mention whether they would agree or not. The language barrier was a big problem. So in order to avoid all the trouble, it was best not to accept them. 2 days later, they finally arrived at the Chinatown survivor base. The Chinatown survivor base was not located in the original Chinatown, but because the whole base was almost all Chinese, and 80% of them came from Chinatown, they were lazy and named the base Chinatown survivor base. And it had been used until now, so it was estimated that the name was useless. The gate of the Chinatown survivor base was very strict. If you wanted to enter the base, you had to go through a lot of checks because the poisonous bees carried the zombie virus. As long as you were stung, there was a great chance that you would become a zombie. They had suffered like this before, so they were extra cautious. All ordinary people who wanted to enter the base had to go through several times more complicated checks than before. Xiao Qing and the others arrived at the gate, and the 2 foreigners immediately said that they knew someone who could simplify the check procedures. Xiao Qing smiled and said, "Leave it to us, we don't need to bother you." One of the 2 clerks immediately stepped forward and said to the guard, "Please inform your base chief that his guest has arrived." Although they came here openly, they still had to guard against the leaders of Country M. It was better to wait until this matter was settled before revealing their identities to Country M. The gatekeeper was stunned for a moment. In the end, he didn't act like a snob like in some novels, and went in to report. The base chief of the Chinatown survivor base coincidentally had the surname Tang. When he heard that someone had come to the door and said that it was a guest he had invited, he was stunned. His first reaction was that someone was being pretentious. After thinking about it carefully, he remembered that he had contacted the Chinese government not long ago. He immediately jumped up and said to the person who came to report, "Go and call the deputy base commander and several regiment commanders over." Then, he hurriedly went to change his clothes. At the very least, he had to look more dignified, so that others wouldn't think that he was looking down on the emissary from the Celestial Empire. He was one of the people who wanted to return to China, probably because he was getting older. He always wanted to return to his roots. Even if he died, he was willing to die in the land that he dreamed of. Therefore, he was so cautious about the people from the Celestial Empire. Even if the other party might not be from the Celestial Empire, he had to see first. The base chief rushed to the gate with people, and saw Xiao Qing and the others who were unfamiliar faces. At this moment, he knew that these people were likely to be from the Celestial Empire. Chapter 522. First of all, they were all people from the Celestial Empire. He didn't know all the people from the Celestial Empire in Country M, but at least he had seen them before. Even if he couldn't recognize them, he was always familiar with them. But he was sure that he hadn't seen these people before. Then they were likely to be from the Celestial Empire. As soon as the base chief came over, one of the 2 civilian staff greeted him and shook his hand very kindly. "Are you the base chief of the Chinatown survivor base? We are from our hometown." When he said that, the base chief understood and quickly said, "Let's go in and talk. It's not a good idea to stand here. If people see us, they will say that I'm not treating the guests well." The group of people went in happily. Xiao Qing walked behind them and carefully looked at the senior executives of the Chinatown survivor base. She felt that everyone wanted to go back to the Celestial Empire. After all, they already had a certain foundation in Country M. The huge Chinatown survivor base was one of the 3 largest bases in Country M. Ordinary people couldn't give up such a foundation. Even if Tang Yaozu could do it, what about the others? Deputy base chiefs and other senior executives, could they give up just like that? Even if they said they could, Xiao Qing wouldn't believe it. Who were they kidding? Since ancient times, there were only 3 things that attracted men the most: power, fame, and beauty. If they stayed in the Chinatown survivor base, these 3 things were easily available. When they returned to the Celestial Empire, everything had to start from scratch. As long as they had some utilitarian thoughts, they would know how to choose. Xiao Qing didn't like to speculate about people's evil intentions, but the fact was like this. If Tang Yaozu wanted to take people back, There must be some people who were willing to go back with him. And there must be some people who didn't want to go back. This was certain. It depended on what kind of thoughts they had. As long as it had nothing to do with Xiaoqing, and they didn't hinder her, she was still very easy to talk to. Tang Yaozu took them to the living room of the main building and brewed tea. After everyone sat down, Tang Yaozu said excitedly, "I have been waiting for you for a long time." The matter of communicating with Tang Yaozu was naturally handed over to the two civilian staff. The role of the two of them was diplomacy. Also, the two of them were more reliable when it came to negotiations. As for other aspects, forget about them. At the very least, Tang Yaozu was smiling the entire time. In the end, it was decided that Tang Yaozu and the rest would return to China. Some of them would leave, while some would stay. Tang Yaozu still needed some time to arrange things after his departure, such as who to hand over the entire base to. Moreover, with so many people leaving, the strength of the base would definitely decrease. If the mutated animals attacked the survivor base again, their defensive strength would definitely decrease. Maybe the base would be destroyed, and the people would die. These things had to be explained in advance. They couldn't leave a mess for the next base chief. It just so happened that Xiaoqing and the others also needed time to complete other tasks. So the matter here was temporarily put aside. However, under the hospitality of the base chief, they decided to stay in the base for a day or two and replenish their stock of vegetables and fruits before leaving. In the Chinatown survivor base, there were many vegetable, fruit and crop farms. Many ordinary people worked there to earn their daily food. Therefore, even if the Chinatown survivor base was besieged by zombies and other difficulties, they could be self-sufficient for a long time. This model was very good and would be very suitable for the current China. The only problem was that most of the bases were now inside the city. The land inside the city was relatively small, so it was difficult to achieve self-sufficiency. Chapter 523. Most of the survivors lived in the city and opened up a safe farm point around the city. However, once the city was besieged by zombies, the situation was not as good as the Chinatown survivor base. Of course, all of this had nothing to do with Xiaoqing. Most of the people in her Jiang city were zombies, and only a small part of them were humans. They could live a self-sufficient life by opening up a small vegetable farm at the entrance. Thinking about it this way, there were advantages to becoming a zombie. They didn't have to worry about making a living, and they never had to worry about starving to death or being eaten by zombies. Thinking about it this way, it was great. They lived in the Chinatown survivor base, and all they did every day was eat, sleep and walk. It was very leisurely, especially Xiaoqing. Those who knew her didn't dare to get close to her. Except for two foreigners, no one dared to come to her every day to eat and drink. As for Dai, he still ate and slept every day. He was either cultivating or sleeping. Xiaoqing was very worried. Dai should be about to level up. Every time he acted abnormally, it meant that he was about to level up. He had been at the peak of level 4 for a long time. This kind of advancement, others couldn't help him. The only thing Xiaoqing could do was take out all the high-level crystal nuclei. She didn't have many crystal nuclei suitable for Dai. She left a lot of crystal nuclei in Jiang City for Gu Panpan and the others to cultivate. She didn't go out to hunt zombies during this period, so she didn't have many crystal nuclei. After the two of them used a lot these days, there weren't many crystal nuclei left. Dai was sleeping more and more. Xiaoqing was very worried. She checked Dai's body and found that his body couldn't bear the rapid absorption of energy. That was why he fell asleep. In the sleeping state, energy would be digested faster than usual. This was a good thing for Dai. However, the lack of crystal nuclei was still a problem. Xiaoqing had a terrible headache, so she called Qin Zishi. "I'm going out to get some crystal nuclei. Can you help me guard Dai? You know the second King Yinlua situation. I don't trust anyone else." Qin Zishi actually wanted to go out with them, but since Xiaoqing said so, he had to stay. "Okay, Sister Qing. Be careful outside." Xiaoqing nodded and walked out. When she walked out, Zhu Machen happened to be sitting on the doorstep, wiping his knife. When he heard that Xiaoqing was going out, he followed her. Let's go together. I'm bored anyway. One more person meant one more strength. Zhu Machen wasn't a weakling, so Xiaoqing agreed. The two foreigners wanted to follow her, but Xiaoqing didn't let them. They were basically two ability users without any abilities. If they were weak, what was the point of following them? What a burden. After leading Zhu Machen out, Xiaoqing met another person. This person was also standing among the higher-ups of the Chinatown survivor base that day. He must be one of the higher-ups of the Chinatown survivor base. He looked similar to Tang Yaozu, but he was young. He was only in his 20s. He was probably Tang Yaozu's relative, and he might even be his son. Even if he wasn't his son, he should be a close relative. Tang Yaozu looked kind and generous, but this young man's eyes had a hint of harshness. Xiaoqing didn't like him at first glance. As soon as Xiaoqing brought Zhu Machen out, she was stopped by the smiling man. I met this young miss yesterday. I'm Tang Tianda. My father is Tang Yaozu. Young miss, you're the young miss. Your whole family is young miss. And you're so good at biting words. Who do you think you are? Xiaoqing mocked him expressionlessly. However, he was Tang Yaozu's son. She had to give him some face. I'm Xiaoqing. This is my friend Zhu Machen. Xiaoqing gave a simple introduction and prepared to leave. She still had things to do. How could she have time to chat with this playboy? Young Miss Xiao, please wait. Where are you planning to go? Could it be that you want to walk around the Chinatown survivor base? I'm the host. You should be looking for me for this kind of thing, Tang Tianda said with a smile. Although he was smiling, his smile was very annoying. At least Xiaoqing hated him. This was because Tang Tianda looked like a lecher. I just want to go out and hunt zombies, Xiaoqing also said with a smile. Host, do you want to go together? Tang Tianda's expression immediately changed. She was such a beautiful woman. Why did she have such unique hobbies? Wasn't it good to go out and eat, drink, and chat? Not to hunt zombies. Chapter 524. This beautiful woman looked at Tang Tianda with an expression that said, Do you dare or not? If you don't dare, I'll leave first. Tang Tianda was immediately enraged. Isn't it just hunting zombies? I'll take you there. Xiaoqing smiled and agreed. Okay. She originally wanted to find someone to take her, but she didn't expect someone to deliver himself to her door. This was just right. Tang Tianda took two of his subordinates, plus Xiaoqing and Zhu Machen, and left the door in a mighty manner. North of the Chinatown survivor base was the original Chinatown site. Because the original Chinatown was occupied by zombies, they had to retreat to the current city and build a new Chinatown survivor base. This was the closest to the Chinatown survivor base, and the place with the highest number of zombies. The enraged Tang Tianda very strongly wanted Xiaoqing to see his ability, but after arriving at the old Chinatown site, he somewhat regretted. Although he had two bodyguards with him, he didn't dare to guarantee that he could safely leave the old Chinatown site. After all, there were too many zombies inside. But he had already arrived at the place, and Xiaoqing was looking at him with a smile behind him. If he retreated at this time, he would really lose all his face. Tang Tianda encouraged himself and summoned up the courage to say, This is the old Chinatown site. There are a lot of zombies inside. If we want to hunt zombies, let's come here. Okay. Xiaoqing carried the military knife and took the lead to step in. She stretched her neck and breathed a sigh of relief. It had been a long time since she came out to hunt zombies. Thinking about it, she still missed it. Machen, I'll be your support, Xiaoqing said lazily. Zhu Machen's ability's damage was particularly high, and her damage was also high, but her ability to control was even higher. Rather than splitting up and hunting everywhere, it was better to cooperate. Zhu Machen nodded and said, I'll leave it to you. What he meant was that the safety of the two of them would be handed over to Xiaoqing, and he would only be responsible for attacking wildly. Tang Tianda was not satisfied. From the beginning, he wanted to chase after Xiaoqing. After all, he had not seen such a good girl like Xiaoqing for a long time. Although the girls in Country M had long legs and good figures, their skin was still lacking compared to the girls in China. Especially after the apocalypse, it was rare to see such a beautiful woman like Xiaoqing. It was no wonder that Tang Tianda's heart was itching. It could only be said that her beauty was alluring. However, he came to such a dangerous place like the old site of Chinatown for Xiaoqing. But Xiaoqing didn't even spare him a glance. Tang Tianda took a step forward and said, "You probably don't know, but this was the original Chinatown of J City. It was the largest Chinatown in the entire country with a population of more than 30,000. After the apocalypse, more than half of the people became zombies, and some were later infected. That is to say, there are at least 20,000 zombies here. You should follow behind me, otherwise what will you do if you encounter danger?" When he said this, he looked affectionately at Xiaoqing. "A delicate and cute woman like you should hide behind a man and enjoy life. Why come out and take risks? Is it because your boyfriend doesn't treat you well? Why don't you follow me? I will definitely treat you well." He was still very confident. What kind of woman could maintain such a beautiful appearance after the apocalypse? Either she was very strong, or she was kept as a mistress. Xiaoqing was most likely the latter. She was kept as a mistress, so why couldn't he? No matter what, he was still the son of the head of the Chinatown survivor base. Before the apocalypse, he was a proper second-generation rich, and the top kind. He was young and had a family background. Liking Xiaoqing was her fortune. Chapter 525. Xiaoqing laughed. She looked Tang Tianda up and down. Tang Tianda's appearance could only be considered average. Seriously speaking, he wasn't ugly or good-looking. His facial features were cold and gloomy, making it hard for people to have a good impression of him. Moreover, this person was very confident. Having confidence wasn't a bad thing, but having too much confidence was arrogance. Xiaoqing's gaze was too blatant, and there was even a hint of mockery in it. This mockery completely infuriated Tang Tianda. He looked around and found that there was no one around. Not everyone had the leisure to come to such a dangerous place. He looked at Zhu Machen again. Zhu Machen probably had some strength, but what use was that? Even in his territory, a powerful dragon couldn't suppress a local snake. Moreover, he didn't think that Zhu Machen could be considered a dragon. Tang Tianda said to Zhu Machen with his nose in the air, "Esteemed guest from the Heavenly Empire, please don't interfere with what I'm about to do. Otherwise, what does it matter if you're an esteemed guest from the Heavenly Empire? This is my territory, and I have 100 ways to make you disappear without a trace." Zhu Machen couldn't help but grin. He really admired Tang Tianda's courage. He was very clear about Xiaoqing's strength, and immediately stood to the side to watch a good show. Tang Tianda was very satisfied with his self-awareness, and walked toward Xiaoqing. "Isn't it good to follow me? You can eat and drink well, and you don't need to come out and suffer. I'm willing to raise you and love you. You just need to be a delicate flower in my hands." Xiaoqing felt a bit disgusted. What the hell was a delicate flower? She had never thought that someone like her could be associated with the word delicate. She was more like a man-eating flower. For example, a big flower. Aside from feeling disgusted, she also wanted to laugh. If she stood in the capital and said that she wanted to find a man, she would probably scare a bunch of people away. But this Tang Tianda had actually delivered himself to her door. It was very interesting. "What did you just say you wanted to do with me in your hands?" Xiaoqing asked with a smile. "Naturally, it's to be the love of my heart." Tang Tianda thought that he was about to succeed. He squinted his eyes and smiled. "I'll give you whatever you want. I want you to stay away from me." Xiaoqing suddenly thought of this lame joke. The moment she said this, Tang Tianda's expression changed. If he still hadn't realized that he had been tricked, then he shouldn't be called Tang Tianda anymore. He should be called Second Fool Tang. Tang Tianda said with a cold face. "What do you mean? You're not willing to agree to my request? Let me ask you, where did you get such good self-awareness?" Xiaoqing looked him up and down sarcastically. He was arrogant, ugly, and didn't have much ability. How could he be so arrogant? "Because I can make you wish you were dead. You refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit." Tang Tianda sneered and said to the two bodyguards beside him, "You two go, take him down for me. When I'm satisfied, maybe I'll let you two have a good time." "I'll let you have a good time." Xiaoqing narrowed her eyes and raised her hand. Zhu Machen silently covered his eyes. He couldn't bear to watch. How fierce and awesome was Xiaoqing. Back then, She was so angry for Lan Yen that she almost massacred the capital. How could Tang Tianda provoke her? Zhu Mochen sighed and said that he couldn't bear to watch. At the same time, he opened a big gap between his fingers. He wasn't sincere at all. It was obvious that he wanted to see a joke. Tang Tianda was very confident in himself. The two paranormals beside him were both level 4 paranormals. In a small base, they would be at the level of a base leader. Even in a large base, they would be able to take on the role of a commander. Chapter 526. Dealing with a weak woman like Xiao Qing. Wouldn't it be more than enough? The two metahumans were actually unwilling. After all, two people dealing with a weak woman was actually a very shameful thing. However, Tang Tianda had their salaries in his hands, and the two of them were not good people either. He immediately said, "Don't worry, it's a piece of cake." Then the two of them rushed over. They obviously did not put Xiao Qing in their eyes, one more arrogant than the other. One of them was a strengthening type metahuman. He immediately activated his ability and reached out to grab Xiao Qing's shoulder. Xiao Qing raised her hand, and vines drilled out from the ground. They effortlessly tied up the two of them. The moment the vines touched the skin of the two people, the sharp thorns pierced their skin and injected the poison. The moment their skin was pierced, they could no longer use their abilities. The two of them were like two dead pigs, hanging in the air by the vines. It had to be said that Xiao Qing's vines had evolved a little after subduing Little Red. Its thorns had started to suck blood. Although it was not as good as Little Red, it was still very easy to suck two people dry. However, Xiao Qing did not directly kill the two of them. She kept them alive because she still had a use for them. Tang Tianda was stunned on the spot. He also thought that Xiao Qing would struggle, and he also thought that there would be a fight. He also thought that there would be a stalemate, but he did not expect that Xiao Qing would directly kill the two of them. It was an instant kill. The two of them had just activated their abilities, and in the blink of an eye, they were already hung up. If this was not an instant kill, then what was? Xiao Qing hooked her finger, and immediately, a vine dragged Tang Tianda over. A level 3 metahuman, Xiao Qing did not even put him in her eyes. Saying that he was an instant kill was already praising him. "What do you want to do?" Tang Tian asked. Xiao Qing said lazily, "What do you think I want to do?" Tang Tianda swallowed his saliva and said, "I'm the son of the chief of the Chinatown survivor base. If you touch me, you'll die too. My father will not let you off." Xiao Qing chuckled and said, "Doesn't it sound like what the villain on TV says before he dies?" Zhu Mochen nodded with a serious expression. Yes. Tang Tianda's face was filled with despair as he struggled. "You can't kill me. Otherwise you, the man in your tent, and the one beside you will all die. You can't bear my father's revenge. Let me go and I can pretend that nothing happened. What happened today was my fault. I apologize to you." Xiao Qing smiled and said, "Don't worry, I won't kill you." Tang Tianda thought that Xiao Qing was convinced and breathed a sigh of relief. Then he said, "I will never tell anyone about what happened today. I was blinded by greed. Miss Xiao, please forgive me." Although he said that, his lowered eyes were full of viciousness. Now that his life was in Xiao Qing's hands, he naturally did not dare to say anything. When he was rescued and returned to the Chinatown survivor base, he could do whatever he wanted with revenge. As a man, of course, he had to be flexible. It was never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. He kept comforting himself, and then fantasized about how he would catch Xiao Qing after returning to the Chinatown survivor base. He would torture Xiao Qing, rape her, then kill her, and so on. Then he was lifted up by Xiao Qing. He was shocked. "Didn't you say you wouldn't kill me?" "Yeah, I didn't say I was going to kill you." Xiao Qing lazily used vines to lift the three people, and took Zhu Mochen deeper inside. She disliked the three people for being noisy, so she used vines to block their mouths. After taking Zhu Mochen to a location near the city center, Xiao Qing said, "Are we going to do it here?" Zhu Mochen nodded. "Let's do it here." He already vaguely knew what Xiao Qing was going to do. He couldn't help but sigh. Xiao Qing was really skilled and daring. "We'll split the crystal cores 40 to 60. I'll take 60. You don't have any objections, right?" Xiao Qing said. Zhu Mochen agreed. Even if he took 40, he would definitely take advantage. He had seen the speed at which Xiaoqing killed zombies. He had stayed here for a day, but the number of zombies he killed was probably less than the number of zombies he killed in an hour with Xiaoqing. Then let's start. Xiaoqing raised her hand. First, she released Guang Guang to protect the two of them. Then she also released Xiaohong. Xiaohong was entrenched on Guang Guang's body. A gorgeous flower bloomed, and it looked a little arrogant. Then, Xiaoqing hung up the three people tied up by vines. Using the military knife in her hand, she cut open their thighs. Fresh blood suddenly flowed out. The three people who didn't know what she was going to do turned pale. Soon, they knew what Xiaoqing was going to do, because the zombies who smelled the blood had already rushed over like flies. Chapter 527. This was a very good bait, and it saved them the trouble of looking for zombies. Xiaoqing lifted the three of them up high, so high that the zombies couldn't bite them. Moreover, the wounds on their legs weren't big, so they could bleed for a long time without dying. After the zombies that smelled the blood rushed over, Xiaoqing began to move. She stretched out her hand, and countless vines came out of the ground as if they were alive. Any zombies that came close were all tied up by the vines. Xiaoqing didn't use a lot of strength, so it only took a few seconds for the zombies to break free. However, there was still Zhu Machen at the side. After Xiaoqing controlled the zombies, Zhu Machen made his move. He dug into his pocket and took out a few black pellets from his fingertips. He said to Xiaoqing, "Can you gather them into a pile?" Xiaoqing nodded, and the vines gathered together, dragging the zombies together. At this time, Zhu Machen jumped up, and the pellets flew out from his fingertips and landed in the pile of zombies. In the next second, the pellets that flew out from his fingertips all exploded. It was like a few bags of explosives, exploding into the crowd of zombies. Other than a few lucky zombies, the rest of the zombies were blown into pieces. Xiaoqing released Dehua, and Dehua took Xiaohong, and happily began to clean up the battlefield. Xiaohong was responsible for extending its tentacles and gathering the zombies' corpses together, while Dehua was responsible for eating. After eating, it would obediently spit out the crystal nuclei. This was because Dehua knew that if it didn't spit them out, it would be torn apart by Xiaoqing to be squeezed into juice. As a flower that knew how to adapt to circumstances, it was still quite smart. It secretly ate 2 crystal nuclei without being discovered, so it just had to spit out the majority of them. Soon, there was a small mountain of crystal nuclei next to Dehua. Then, the zombies smelled the blood and continuously rushed over. They were continuously killed by Xiaoqing and Zhu Machen. The crystal nuclei next to Dehua piled up more and more. Not to mention Zhu Machen, who knew Xiaoqing better. Even Tang Tianda and the others who were in danger were dumbfounded. They now knew what kind of killing god they had provoked. Perhaps Xiaoqing alone could slaughter the current Chinatown survivor base. Tang Tianda's face was completely pale, because he knew very well that even if he returned to his own territory, he wouldn't be able to kill Xiaoqing. Right now, he could only hope that Xiaoqing would remember her promise and spare his life. Otherwise, even if Xiaoqing killed him, his death would be in vain. No one would have the ability to avenge him. As the saying goes, if you often walk by the river, how can your shoes not get wet? The first time his shoes got wet, he met a peerless iron plate like Xiaoqing. Other than his bad character, there was no other explanation. Xiaoqing was multitasking. While controlling the vines to capture zombies, she sat next to Dehua and began to count the crystal nuclei. She divided the crystal nuclei into 2 piles. A small pile for Zhu Machen and a large pile for her. She really was the kind of person who could use them for a few months after coming out to hunt. After about an hour, the pile of crystal nuclei was enough to drown Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing stretched and said, "How about we stop here for today? I think there's quite a lot." Zhu Machen was still in a state of shock. He had lived for so many years, but he had never felt like today that zombies were so easy to kill. They were simply a pile of wooden people. They could be killed at will. And they didn't even fight back. He just had to stand aside and throw metal balls. So when Xiaoqing called him, he was still in a state of shock. So he just nodded foolishly. Chapter 528. Xiaoqing handed the small pile to Zhu Machen, then said, "This is your share. You can count them yourself." "I don't need to count," Zhu Machen said honestly. "There's too many of them. You can help me keep them. I don't have any storage space. You can give them to me when we return to the country." Xiaoqing thought for a moment then said, "Okay." Zhu Machen picked up a few high-leveled crystal cores for his daily use. The rest were all given to Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing was just about to put away Dehua and the others and leave when she suddenly heard an angry scream. She stopped in her tracks. In any case, not far away, several black dots were jumping all the way from the rooftops and rushing over. When she got closer, she discovered that these dots were all zombies. Moreover, they were all at least level 4. There were even level 5 zombie kings. Moreover, there were 3 level 5 zombie kings. Xiaoqing more or less understood. There was always a boss among the zombies in every place. She had killed so many of their subordinates, so the boss had come looking for her. Tang Tianda's already pale face became even paler. He said dejectedly, "Big sister, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. You have to listen to me on this. These zombies are all very high-leveled. We can't beat them. Can you put me down and let's run together?" Xiaoqing ignored him. She just stretched her body then sighed and said, "There aren't any level 6 zombies. If there were a few level 6 zombies, she could get a few level 6 zombie crystal cores. She might be able to break through to level 7 today. A few level 4 and level 5 zombies, to put it bluntly, she really didn't care about them. Maybe there really are level 6 zombies. After all, this is such a big Chinatown." Zhu Machen frowned and said, "Maybe they're watching us from the shadows." Xiaoqing rubbed her chin then said, "Do you want to practice? If you don't want to practice, then leave it to me. I'm worried that Dai will be worried when she wakes up and doesn't see me." "I'll leave it to you," Zhu Machen said self-deprecatingly. "I'll hold the line." Xiaoqing nodded and slowly stretched her waist. Then she directly launched her attack. Although Tang Tianda and the others had seen Xiaoqing's control ability before, they did not directly face her strength. They did not have any concept of her strength until now. Xiaoqing directly rushed towards those zombies. At the same time, vines drilled out from her back, completely covering her body. By the time Tang Tianda and the others saw Xiaoqing again, she was already in the middle of the zombie horde. She was grabbing a zombie's head with each hand and twisting it easily, twisting it off. Then, the 2 heads were casually thrown away by Xiaoqing, as if she was throwing away garbage. The eyebrows of the people watching twitched. Xiaoqing calmly shuttled through the zombie horde. Those who tried to ambush her were all blocked by the vines. The vines did not kill them. They only acted as a shield, protecting Xiaoqing as she swept through the zombie horde. It had been a long time since she had personally fought. After all, just the vines were enough to deal with most of her enemies. She was too strong, and there were no opponents who could force her to go all out. This time, she just wanted to stretch her body a little, that's all. The zombies' levels were too low for her. Killing them was not a challenge at all. It was a one-sided slaughter. After Xiaoqing stretched her body a little, she prepared to directly deal with them. After all, the world was big, and going back to cook for Dai was the most important thing. Just as Xiaoqing was about to go all out, she suddenly heard the sound of wind behind her. Xiaoqing immediately lowered her body. Then Little Red made its move. Its tentacles quickly wrapped around the attacker, making it look like a dumpling. Then, all of its tentacles tried to dig into the attacker's skin. It tried to take root and absorb the attacker's blood. However, before it could pierce through, the ambusher let out a sharp cry. This cry was very unpleasant to the ears, and it made people dizzy. Even Lil Red could not help but loosen its tentacles. In the end, the ambusher escaped. The attacker was a young man. He looked like he was only 17 or 18 years old. He had a hunched back, and sharp teeth like wolf teeth protruded from his mouth. He was a zombie, but his clothes were very clean. There was no dirt on the surface of his body. He was dry and quiet, just like a living person. However, he was still a zombie, and a very strong one. He was at least level 6. Xiaoqing's eyes were cold, but there was a kind of bloodthirsty impulse in her heart. She had not used all of her strength in a fight for a long time. Maybe this time, she could be willful for once. She clenched her fists. The vines immediately wrapped around the surrounding level 4 and 5 zombies like snakes, and directly strangled them to death. In the end, only the young zombie was left. The young zombie stared at Xiaoqing. His eyes were full of bloodthirst. He tightened his body and bent his waist, as if he was ready to attack. Xiaoqing put away the vines, and even gave up the dagger. Only her long nails slowly stretched out. The sharp nails were like the young zombie's fangs, shining with cold light. The young zombie was the first to launch an attack. He roared and rushed toward Xiaoqing. The sharp nails pierced toward Xiaoqing's neck. Xiaoqing immediately tangled with him. The feeling of fists hitting flesh was very comfortable. Even in normal days, she often practiced with Yan Hanqing, the kind of pure hand-to-hand combat. However, there were a lot of restrictions when practicing with Yan Hanqing. After all, they were on the same side. She could not use her killing skills. It was not comfortable at all. Again, Xiaoqing grabbed the young zombie's neck and threw him to the ground. The young zombie roared powerlessly and stretched out his hand to scratch Xiaoqing. Then, he was thrown aside by Xiaoqing. The young zombie immediately rushed over again. In a few minutes, Xiaoqing threw him to the ground again. Although he was also a level 6 zombie, after all, he was much weaker than Xiaoqing. Even if Xiaoqing did not use her superpower, he was no match for Xiaoqing. Tang Tianda and the others were stunned. They had never seen anyone who could fight with a zombie bare-chested. No, it was a one-sided beating. This zombie was a level 6 zombie king. Level 6. It could form a zombie tide and destroy a large base. Also, Xiaoqing was a wood superpower user. A level 6 zombie king was being beaten by Xiaoqing like a child. This was too unreal. Tang Tianda could not help but ask Zhu Machen, "Is she really a human? Is she really not a level 7 zombie in disguise?" Chapter 529. The young zombie had been dominating the old site of Chinatown for a long time. He had never been bullied like this before. He felt wronged and angry at that time. He bared his teeth and rushed up again and again like a beast. Again and again, he was beaten to the ground by Xiaoqing. He looked particularly pitiful. Every time he got up, he was particularly tenacious. His clothes were tattered. Xiaoqing looked at the time. According to the usual practice, Air Dai should be waking up at this time. She must go back first. At least, she had to get home before Air Dai woke up. Otherwise, if Air Dai couldn't see her, it would definitely turn the sky upside down. Therefore, Xiaoqing was ready to end this quickly. She wanted to take this level 6 nucleus home and appease her little Air Dai. While they were still in the Chinatown survivor base, which was a relatively safe place, she quickly upgraded the Air Dai. Otherwise, if the Air Dai suddenly upgraded halfway after leaving the Chinatown survivor base, the two of them might have to have sex in the wild. It was too shameful to use the sky as a blanket and the ground as a bed. Quickly stopping her shameless thoughts, Xiaoqing coughed, raised her hand, and prepared to kill the zombie. But sometimes, especially when people were unlucky, it was easy to do things with twists and turns such as now. Xiaoqing was just about to end everything in front of her and leave with the harvest when someone wanted to interfere. "Stop!" An anxious and frightened female voice rang out. Following her voice was a dagger that flew over. Xiaoqing frowned. She held the weak dagger in her palm and looked at the person. The person who ran over was a woman. She looked young in her 20s. Her ability was not strong at most level 3. But how could a woman with only level 3 ability survive in a place with so many zombies? After the woman ran over, she immediately hugged the young zombie lying on the ground, pressed his head, and then looked at Xiaoqing in horror. "Please let him go. He doesn't know anything. He doesn't know anything." The rebellious young zombie was pressed in the arms of the girl. Although he still bared his teeth and looked unconvinced, he carefully put away his nails for fear of hurting the girl. Xiaoqing was stunned. Except for her own friends, she had never seen people and zombies get along so peacefully. Xiaoqing was stunned for a long time, and then asked, "You raised him?" The girl hesitated for a moment, and then nodded. Today the young zombie, who was very gentle and let her comb his hair, suddenly ran out crazily. She was only a level 3 paranormal, and her ability was useless. She couldn't keep up with the young zombie at all. When she caught up, she saw Xiaoqing about to kill the young zombie. She was scared out of her wits. With the young zombie's strength, it was very safe in the Chinatown survivor base. There was no one and no zombies that could be his opponent. She didn't expect that Xiaoqing would suddenly appear. The girl was desperate. She only thought that today was definitely over. After all, who would let go of a level 6 zombie and a person who raised zombies? He was my junior. He chased me for a long time. Later, when the apocalypse happened, we happened to be in school. He came to find me and took me away from the school full of zombies. He has always been protecting me. Otherwise, with my weakness, I would have become a zombie's food. Later, in order to protect me, he attracted zombies. I hid in the car and watched him being surrounded by zombies. Only then did I realize that I had fallen in love with him. The girl's tears slowly overflowed. At that moment, I awakened my ability. I thought I could save him, but I found out that my awakened ability was very weak. Zombies wouldn't hurt me, they would treat me as one of their kind. I went back to the zombie group and brought him out. But no matter how hard I tried, he became a zombie. Later he begged me, "Yin, kill me. I don't want to become a zombie. I don't want to hurt you. And I don't want to eat people. But how could I bear to do that? This is my lover. I would rather he become a monster. I would rather he never remember me than kill him." Chapter 530. I taught him to wash his hands, brush his teeth, and change his clothes. After a long time, he no longer rejected me. He began to get close to me, protect me, and rely on me like a child. I am already very satisfied. These times were all stolen. A person like me is selfish and cold. I should have died long ago. I only ask you one thing. Kill me first. I don't want to see him die in front of me. When love became an obsession, women at this time were the most terrifying, but also the most respectable. Xiaoqing could almost imagine the girl's despair. She could also imagine how she struggled to survive in this world with her lover, who had turned into a zombie. She even envied the two of them. One became a zombie to protect her lover, while the other didn't leave her lover, even after he became a zombie. Wasn't this something to be envied by others? Just like Yan Qiua Er Dian, Yan Hanqing. None of them had abandoned her. Xiaoqing squatted down and touched the young zombie's head. Then she smiled and said to the girl, "You are very powerful. He is already at level 6. I think he will be able to return to normal soon." After the girl was shocked, she was pleasantly surprised. Her voice trembled as she said, "He can still recover? Return to normal? Become a normal person?" Xiaoqing was facing Tang Tianda and the others, so Tang Tianda and the others couldn't see Xiaoqing's movements. Xiaoqing stretched out her hand, and her fingertips slowly stretched out with a grayish-black fingernail with a sinister smell. "I'm special, but since I can live like a normal person, I believe he can too." The girl was so surprised that she covered her mouth and tears fell down. She was already in despair. She wanted to stay with him for a lifetime. Even if he was a zombie for the rest of his life, it didn't matter. She didn't expect that one day, someone would tell her that her lover had a chance to return to normal. He would smile at her, cry at her, talk to her, and comfort her when she was sad. "Thank you. Thank you." The young girl naturally understood that Xiaoqing wasn't going to kill them. Other than feeling a glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel, she also felt endless gratitude. She thought they were going to die today. Xiaoqing and the young girl shared their experience of raising zombies. High-level zombies actually have their own thoughts. Even if their thoughts are very simple like children, at least they have their own likes and dislikes. Chatting with them more, accompanying them more, and guiding them to do something will be beneficial to their recovery. My air dye not only knows how to be jealous now, but also knows how to say one or two simple words. Xiaoqing was very proud. When she talked about air dye's ability to speak, her tone was as if her own child had won the first place in the grade. The young girl was very envious, but also a little depressed. When can I hear him call my name again? Soon. According to my estimation, zombies should have the ability to express themselves around level 7 or 8. Xiaoqing continued. If you have the ability, You can give him more high-level zombie nuclei to cultivate. It will be faster this way. So that's how it is. The young girl suddenly understood. After we lived here, Mingyi often went out to hunt zombies. There was a level 6 zombie here, but Mingyi was only level 5 at that time. When I wasn't paying attention, he went out to fight it alone. He came back with bruises all over his body. He insisted on giving me a nucleus, but I didn't use it. The young girl took out a nucleus from her sachet and handed it to Xiaoqing. This is for you. Take it as a thank you gift for not hurting Mingyi. You can give it to him. Maybe he can directly rise to level 6. Xiaoqing didn't accept it and said lightly. She always had a faint good impression of this young girl. It was probably because they had a similar fate that made her feel pity for the young girl. This was probably the feeling of sympathizing with each other. Take it. I can feel that Mingyi is slowly recovering. I think you probably need a level 6 nucleus more than me. The young girl smiled. Mingyi is fine. I'm already very satisfied. Xiaoqing hesitated a little and took the nucleus. She really needed the nucleus. This level 6 nucleus was enough for Air Dai to rise to level 6. She especially hoped that after Air Dai rose to level 6, he would be able to call out her name fluently. If there is a chance, I will compensate you. Xiaoqing said lightly. The young girl just smiled, and then held the young zombie's hand. The young zombie's throat kept making impatient sounds, but he obediently let the young girl hold him. He could probably feel the fear and lingering fear in the young girl's heart. He would secretly use his palm to touch the young girl's hair to comfort her. Xiaoqing couldn't help but smile because of the warm atmosphere. She asked the young girl, "Have you ever thought of leaving? Go back to the Celestial Empire. I have built a city in the Celestial Empire called Jiang City. There are all my kind there." The young girl was moved for a moment, but she shook her head in the end. "Actually, I really want to go back to my hometown. But forget it. I have built our home here. After staying here for a long time, I don't want to change places. If Mingyi recovers, maybe we will go back. At that time, we will look for you." "Okay." Xiaoqing stood up, and then said, "The door of Jiang City will always be open for you." "Thank you." The young girl smiled shyly, and then said, "My name is Jiang Yin. He is Lan Mingyi. What about you?" "Xiaoqing." Xiaoqing waved her hand. "If fate wills it, we will meet again." Then she turned around and left. Tang Tianda, who didn't hear the whole process, was stunned. A second ago they were still fighting. How did it end peacefully? Moreover, it was a zombie. Women were really strange creatures. Chapter 531. Xiaoqing left without any reluctance. She was still carrying the 3 living creatures in Zhumachan. She looked very relaxed. This was Jiang Yin and Lan Ming's paradise. If the 2 of them didn't want to be disturbed, she wouldn't rashly disturb them. Xiaoqing knew that the 2 of them would live very well. When they returned to the survival base in Chinatown, it was already past Air Dai's usual time to wake up. When Xiaoqing arrived at the gate, she put down the 3 people and calmly threatened them. "I didn't kill you not because I don't have the ability, but because I'm too lazy to do it. I'm sure the 3 of you are very clear about this. I'll give you 2 choices. First, forget everything that happened today, and pretend that nothing happened. Second, you don't need to go back." Tang Tianda was really obedient this time. "We only came out to kill zombies today. We didn't encounter many zombies, so we came back. Did anything else happen? Why didn't I know about it?" Xiaoqing's face was full of satisfaction. She let go of the 3 people and said indifferently, "Slap your own face. Your face is so pale. Who are you trying to show it to?" When the 3 people heard Xiaoqing's words, they immediately slapped their faces. After a while, their faces turned red. They were afraid that Xiaoqing would feed them to the big flower. "Okay, if you keep slapping your face, it's going to swell. Let's go." Xiaoqing calmly led the way. The group of people returned to the survival base in Chinatown. When they returned to the base, she couldn't help but quicken her pace. What if Air Dai couldn't find her, and went crazy? Xiaoqing wasn't worried that Air Dai would hurt others because of his madness. She was only worried that others would find out that Air Dai wasn't right and hurt him. The few people behind her couldn't keep up with her speed, and were left far behind. Xiaoqing quickly returned to the place where they were temporarily staying. Along the way, she didn't find any panic and was very calm. After opening the door, she realized that Dai had not gone crazy. He was sitting on the sofa, hugging his knees and staring blankly out the window. When he heard the door open, he quickly turned his head. When he saw that it was Xiaoqing, he pounced on her. Xiaoqing's first reaction was to heave a big sigh of relief, and then her heart ached. Dai was too obedient. The more obedient he was, the more sorry Xiaoqing felt. "Have you eaten anything? I left some food in the fridge, and left a note at the bedside." Xiaoqing touched Dai's head and said. Dai shook his head slowly, and then plunged into Xiaoqing's arms sadly. When he opened his eyes, he realized that Xiaoqing was gone. He couldn't smell Xiaoqing in the whole house, so he was not in the mood to look at the note. At that moment, he almost went crazy. If it weren't for the fact that he was gradually recovering, he would have rushed out to find Xiaoqing. After forcing himself to calm down, Dai sat on the sofa and didn't go anywhere. He quietly waited for Xiaoqing to come back. He knew that Xiaoqing would never leave him alone. She must have gone out to do something and would be back soon. Dai just waited like that. Time passed little by little, but surprisingly, he didn't get irritated. He was very quiet. Perhaps even the time he waited was warm in his eyes, because the person he was waiting for was Xiaoqing. "Good boy, let's eat first." Xiaoqing opened the fridge and was about to take out the food that she had prepared earlier to heat up. Halfway through, she changed her mind and directly made a new dish. When she was cooking, Dai followed behind her obediently. Wherever she went, Dai followed. He didn't make a fuss, and just watched Xiaoqing quietly. Chapter 532. Sometimes, Xiaoqing would pick up a piece of cooked food and put it in his mouth. The scene was very warm. After the meal was ready, the two sat around the table and ate. After eating, Xiaoqing took out the 6th-rank crystal core from her pocket and gave it to Dumbo. Then she took out a lot of 4th and 5th-rank crystal cores from the space and patted Dumbo's head. "Go and cultivate. Once you break through, I'll take you out to hunt." Dumbo nodded and said, "All right, I'll take you with me." Dai took the nuclei and went to cultivate. After he went back to the room, Xiaoqing didn't rest. Xiaoqing sat outside, holding a nucleus and absorbing it. Since she got the red soil, she had broken through to level 6. These days, she had been using the red soil and the high-level nuclei to cultivate. Now the energy in her body was basically saturated. She only needed an opportunity to break through to the 7th level. At that time, she wouldn't dare to say anything else, but at least among the superpowered people, her strength would definitely be considered as one of the top few. Naturally, the stronger one was the better. The stronger one was, the safer one's companions would be, and the more capable one would be to protect the people one wanted to protect. The most painful thing in the world was to watch one's companions get hurt or unable to do anything. Especially in this post-apocalyptic world, there were dangers everywhere. Strength was the prerequisite for everything. If one wanted to live a good life, one needed strength. If one wanted to protect one's companions and friends, one needed strength. If one didn't want to be bullied, one still needed strength. Even the most basic right to speak required strength. If one didn't have strength, others wouldn't listen to one's words because it was meaningless. Xiaoqing was thinking about how to become stronger all the time. The road to becoming stronger had no end. Xiaoqing just needed to be one step faster than others. That was enough. They didn't talk for the whole night. Both of them were cultivating, and didn't even dare to sleep. Dai didn't sleep, and Xiaoqing didn't dare to sleep. She was afraid that Dai would suddenly break through, or something would happen during the breakthrough. She didn't have time to react, so she simply didn't sleep. Anyway, for her now, it wasn't a big deal to not sleep for one night. After midnight, when it was almost dawn, there was a strange fluctuation in Dai's room. At that moment, Xiaoqing knew that Dai had broken through. She quickly went to Dai's room, but she didn't intervene. She was more nervous than Dai, even though it was Dai's breakthrough. Xiaoqing was afraid that Dai's breakthrough would cause some problems. After all, it was proven that the higher the level of zombies, the higher their intelligence. What if Dummy awakened his memory when he broke through, or directly forgot the time when he was Dummy? What about that period of time? Xiao Qing wanted to know the situation of Dai's breakthrough as soon as possible. Xiao Qing sat cross-legged at the door, staring at Dai. Dai was at the most critical moment of his breakthrough. Success or failure, it was just a moment. It would be a lie to say that she wasn't nervous. After Xiao Qing released the flower, she calmly pulled it to her side. Then, she grabbed the flower's leaves with one hand and the flower's petals with the other. She used so much strength that the flower kept shaking its head in pain. No matter how smart it was just a flower. It couldn't even make a sound, let alone beg for mercy. Xiao Qing held the flower expressionlessly and ravaged the flower's leaves and petals. She looked calm, but she couldn't control her nervousness and was about to jump up. Just as her heart jumped to her throat, the weird breath on Dumbo's body dispersed. He suddenly opened his eyes, and there was a sharp and deep light in his eyes. As he opened his eyes, a mighty pressure spread out in all directions. The breakthrough was successful. If someone was in the wild, they would find that the mutant animals and zombies near the Chinatown survivor base were crazily running away. They all noticed Dai's breakthrough. The breakthrough from level 5 to level 4 was very big. Just like in a zombie group, there might be many level 5 zombies, but there must be only one level 6 zombie. After all, a mountain couldn't have two tigers, unless one was male and the other was female. For zombies, they didn't have the concept of male and female. So in a zombie group, there was usually only one zombie with the highest level. The mutant animals and zombies wandering around were all independent and didn't have a group. So when they felt that a new king was born, they quickly ran away. They ran very fast, as if they were afraid that Dai would run out and do something to them. At the moment when Dummy Dai broke through, Xiao Qing was also extremely nervous. She suddenly grasped the big flower tightly and directly tore off a petal. Please have a moment of silence for the poor flower. The poor flower was in so much pain that it jumped in place. As soon as Dumbo too broke through, he slowly withdrew his aura. His eyes looked very wise and far-sighted, with a hint of profoundness. He was not at all like the usual Dumbo too. Xiao Qing panicked and couldn't help but shout, Dai! Dai, who was originally unfathomable, immediately returned to the way he was before the breakthrough. He happily jumped into Xiao Qing's arms. There was no trace of his previous wisdom, as if everything was just Xiao Qing's illusion. More importantly, his strength increased after the breakthrough, and he couldn't control it for a while. So he directly pushed Xiao Qing down. Xiao Qing's back hit the ground hard. If she wasn't a zombie, she might have broken bones. Xiao Qing angrily pushed Dai, who was in her arms, and said, Get up, stop acting like a spoiled child. You're going to break your bones. Dai innocently got up, squatted aside, and looked at Xiao Qing pitifully. His eyes were too lethal. Xiao Qing, who was originally not angry, suddenly became soft-hearted. She helped Dai up and said, It's a good thing that you broke through, but it's not dawn yet. We can still sleep for a while. She pulled Dai to sleep. She had to tell the truth. When she saw that Dai didn't return to normal after the breakthrough, she felt a little relieved. Her thoughts were very selfish, and she felt a little guilty. Therefore, she missed the light that flashed in Dai's eyes when she told Dai that they could still sleep for a while. Xiao Qing pulled Dai back to her room. She first put Dai on the bed, then lazily took it off. After getting into the bed, she said goodnight and closed her eyes. Before falling asleep, Xiao Qing felt a little disappointed. Dai didn't have that aspect of the breakthrough this time. Cough cough. A person should be pure. Why was she disappointed? Chapter 533. After Dai was upgraded, the heavy burden on Xiao Qing's heart was lifted. She fell asleep with Dai in her arms. Naturally, she did not notice that Dai was lying in her arms with his eyes closed and his cheeks flushed red. He vaguely remembered that when he was still called Fu Jingxian, he was in contact with darkness and darkness every day. His father, who was obsessed with women, brought his mistress and an older child into the family the moment his mother died. His brother, who was filled with jealousy, tried to kill him several times. The most serious time was when he was pushed down the stairs and had to get stitches on his head. His father never visited him in the hospital. In the end, his father said indifferently, "Why didn't you be more careful?" At that time, he knew that other than himself, no one would care about his life. Even his relatives only got close to him for money. His last memory was when Fu Jingma pushed him into a group of zombies. Then he was drowned by the zombies. It was a heart-wrenching, bone-piercing pain. After that, it was the only warm sun in his life. There was a woman who would gently cut his nails for him. She would scold him when he dug out the nucleus that was covered in brain matter and wanted to eat it. Then, she would wash the nucleus and pass it to him. She would gently protect him and protect him under her wings. She was willing to sacrifice herself to save him. Fu Jingshan would always remember that woman carrying him and walking out of the capital step by step. She was indomitable, and there was a pool of blood under her feet. She said, "So what if I have to go against the whole world for you?" In this world, Fu Jingshan could not find a second person who would treat him like that. Towards Fu Jingma, he had a moment of resentment. Then he felt lucky. He felt lucky that Fu Jingma pushed him into the group of zombies. Otherwise, with his personality, even if he met Xiao Qing would definitely not like him. Selfish, cold, and antisocial. Right now, he urgently needed to confirm that he had such warmth, and that this was not a dream. The next day, when Xiao Qing woke up, she felt that the thing she was hugging had changed its position. Like an octopus, it wrapped itself around her tightly. "Wake up, baby." Xiao Qing was hugged so tightly that she couldn't get up and wash up. She could only wake up Air Dai in her arms. Air Dai was obviously not fully awake. He blinked his eyes and said sleepily, "Sleepy." Xiao Qing did not react at first. She reached out to grab the clothes. Halfway through, she suddenly realized that Air Dai had spoken. She was so surprised and happy that her fingertips were trembling. In the end, she hugged Air Dai and said, "Say it again, say it again." Air Dai was also stunned. He had never seen Xiao Qing lose her self-control like this. He was stunned and did not know how to react. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Qing." At that moment, Xiao Qing felt that she was going to cry. She hugged Air Dai tightly and did not want to let go. She was so excited that she did not know what to say. She had waited for this day for too long. Xiao Qing still remembered how happy she was when Air Dai spoke for the first time with difficulty. This time Air Dai really knew how to speak. However, probably because Air Dai had not spoken for too long, he could only speak one word at a time. Sometimes he would even stutter. Xiao Qing was very patient. She brushed her teeth and cooked dinner. After the two of them ate, she patiently taught Air Dai how to speak. Air Dai spoke like a child. Not only did he speak one word at a time, but he also could not speak clearly. Sometimes, Xiao Qing had to think for a long time before she could understand what Air Dai was saying. Chapter 534. She took out a book from her space that was used to teach children. The reason she had put this book in her space was actually for little Bun. She didn't think that she would end up using it on Air Dai. Air Dai looked a bit slow, but her learning speed wasn't slow. By the time Zhu Machin came to find her, Air Dai was already able to say an entire sentence word by word. For example, "A Qing wants to eat fried soy sauce noodles." This was one of the first few sentences that Air Dai learned. Normal people probably wouldn't be able to understand the thoughts of a foodie. "I'll make it for you tonight." Xiao Qing rubbed Air Dai's head. Then, she heard someone knock on the door. She walked over and opened the door. The person outside was Zhu Machin. These past few days, they've already discussed with Tang Yaozu how to take the people away and other issues. They're going to meet the current ruler of M country. Do you want to go with them? Xiao Qing thought for a bit, then shook her head and said, "I won't be participating in this. Call me when you're forming a small team and going out to investigate the source of the insect plague." "Okay." Zhu Machin nodded then said, "Then I'll be leaving first." Xiao Qing nodded and sent Zhu Machin off. She was too lazy to participate in that kind of pompous meeting, where even a few words had to be tactful. It was better to stay at home and accompany Air Dai. Air Dai had just learned how to speak, and she was at her most curious. Her favorite thing to do was to point at something and have Air Dai call out its name. Air Dai was so worried that her eyebrows were knitted together, making her look especially pitiful. In the afternoon, Xiaoqing looked at the time and prepared to go out to buy groceries and cook. She didn't want to leave Air Dai alone at home, and Air Dai didn't want to be alone at home either. So the two of them went out together. After going out, Xiaoqing was still in a state of excitement. She pointed at the car and asked Air Dai, pointed at the house and asked Air Dai, and pointed at the people and asked Air Dai. Air Dai was stunned. He knew it was a car, but he didn't know what brand it was. He knew that it was a house, but he didn't know if it was a restaurant or an arcade. He could differentiate between men and women, but he really didn't know their names. From this, it could be seen how unreliable Xiaoqing was when she was excited. "Baby, what are we eating tonight?" As soon as Xiaoqing entered the market, she began to ask Air Dai. Air Dai was afraid that she would suddenly ask him, "Do you know what kind of vegetable this is?" He hurriedly said, "Fried sauce noodles." He had eaten Xiaoqing's jajang noodles once before, and it tasted amazing. Since then he could not forget about it. "Jajang noodles. I almost forgot about it." Xiaoqing touched her chin. She pulled Air Dai to buy the ingredients to make jajang noodles. She definitely needed streaky pork, but she couldn't find the meat she wanted in the market. So, she could only go out of the city to hunt. She still had a few bottles of bean paste, which she got from some stores at the beginning of the apocalypse. She needed some cucumbers, radishes, and green onions. Besides jajang noodles, she also needed to make something else, because it would be boring to only eat jajang noodles. So, in addition to the ingredients to make jajang noodles, she also bought some other things. When she was shopping, she found that there was mangosteen in the base. It was very fresh. After peeling it, the meat inside was white and looked very delicious. Xiaoqing couldn't help but buy some. On the way back, she met Tang Tianda. Before Xiaoqing said a word, Tang Tianda was like a virgin who was about to be molested by a hooligan. He screamed and almost hid in the bodyguard's arms. Chapter 535. This time, the bodyguard following him had changed, but he was still tall and strong. The bodyguard who was used as a safe haven was stunned for a moment and stammered, "Young Master Tang, I don't like men." He frowned, probably because he felt that his cucumber was about to be tarnished. But he was a straight man, until he had no friends. Tang Tianda, who was originally very nervous, became angry. "Even if I want to find a man, I won't find one with your looks." The other bodyguard's face was numb. Did that mean that he admitted that he liked men? Tang Tianda obviously didn't realize what he had said. He was very reserved and said to Xiaoqing with some fear, "Young Master Xiao." "Ahem, Captain. I'm really just passing by this time." Xiaoqing nodded and didn't prepare to do anything to him. Then, Air Dai jumped on her like a bear and hugged her tightly. The jealousy on his face was very obvious. Xiaoqing, who hadn't felt Air Dai's jealousy for a long time, suddenly felt a little happy in her heart. This was probably the legendary coquettish on the outside. Xiaoqing, who was cold on the outside, responded lazily, and prepared to go home with the dummy on her back. It took a long time to prepare the sauce for the zhajiangmian noodles. Plus, she had to start cooking earlier so as not to delay dinner. Otherwise, dinner would become a midnight snack. Tang Tianda suddenly stopped Xiaoqing. "Wait, Captain Xiao." It was obvious that he was a little hesitant. Moreover, he was very afraid of Xiaoqing. It was very strange that he could stop Xiaoqing. Tang Tianda stammered, "I have something to talk to you about." Xiaoqing looked at the time and said, 10 minutes. Don't delay my cooking time." Tang Tianda hurriedly said, "Okay." Then, he consciously followed Xiaoqing. The two bodyguards looked at each other and felt bitter. This young Master Tang couldn't be interested in Xiaoqing, right? She was a good woman. Young Master Tang couldn't be planning to force himself on her after failing to woo her, right? He had done similar things many times. Although they were helpless, they still had to follow because their mission was to protect Tang Tianda. After returning to the place where they lived, Air Dai obediently became a small tail. Wherever Xiaoqing went, Air Dai followed. Tang Tianda sat on the sofa cautiously and watched Xiaoqing arrange the vegetables and fruits she bought. Then she took a few mangosteens, peeled the pulp, sprinkled an unknown powder, put it on a plate, and brought it over. Tang Tianda subconsciously reached for the plate and said, "Thank you." But he didn't take it. Xiaoqing calmly put the plate in front of Erdai. She touched Erdai's head and said to Erdai, "Eat less. There will be noodles with soy sauce later." Then she said to Tang Tianda, "It's not for you. Fucking retard." After she was done, Xiaoqing sat on the sofa. Erdai immediately stuffed a piece of mangosteen over. Xiaoqing opened her mouth and bit it. Then she asked in a muffled voice, "What do you want to say to me?" Tang Tianda said to the two bodyguards, "You two go out first." The two bodyguards looked at each other and didn't want to go out. They especially wanted to persuade Tang Tianda. "Why can't you take a fancy to someone? Can't you see that she has a pretty boy by her side? Don't tell me you want to send us away so that you can play with the pretty boy and force yourself on her?" They decided to go outside obediently. Even if they heard the sound of Tang Tianda and his wife hitting each other, they wouldn't go in, because Tang Tianda asked them to leave. Chapter 536. They had been displeased with this son of a bitch for a long time. After the two bodyguards left, Tang Tianda said honestly, "It's like this. My father has always wanted to go back to China, because he feels that he is an outsider in M country. So even if he has to start over after going back, even if it takes a long time to rebuild a base as big as the current Chinatown survivor base, or even if there is no way to restore the glory in M country, it doesn't matter as long as he can return to his homeland." But some people don't think so. They think that M country is very good. They already have so much power. Why should they go back to China and start over? So there was a disagreement. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, although there was a disagreement, it has been resolved. Some people are willing to go back to China and leave with my father. The others don't want to go back and stay to run the Chinatown survivor base. Isn't this a happy ending for everyone? Speaking up to this point, Tang Tianda's face was full of distress. But recently, I felt that something was wrong, especially after you guys came here and discussed with my father about returning to the country. My father changed a lot. He often frowned and even sent two especially strong experts to be my bodyguards. His eyes were always filled with worry, giving me the feeling that he was afraid that something would happen to me. So, Xiaoqing leaned on Erdai's thigh in boredom. Erdai immediately massaged her temples. The scene looked very decadent. Tang Tianda was a little envious of Xiaoqing's carefree attitude, but he still said honestly, "I know that you are very strong. Even if 100 paranormals were to fight against you, they would be nothing more than food. I just hope that if an accident happens one day, you can lend a helping hand to my father. Please." He had never been a good person. He was a playboy. The bad things he had done could be written into a 10-meter-long scroll. But even if he was a bad person, he had his own merits. His only merit was probably filial piety. Tang Tianda's mother passed away very early, and his father was busy with his career, so he didn't really care about him. Before the apocalypse, he was just a good-for-nothing rich kid who did nothing but squander. He often went against Tang Yaozu. It wasn't until the apocalypse that he realized that his father actually loved him very much. Tang Tianda, who was originally very rebellious, although he was still a loafer, he finally began to understand his old father. He had no ability or wisdom, but he had a beast-like intuition. He always felt that the entire Chinatown survivor base looked calm, but it had a sense of foreboding. Coupled with his father's unusual behavior, he couldn't help but beg Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing stared at Tang Tianda with her clear eyes. After a while she said, "Why should I help you?" Tang Tianda tasted bitterness in his mouth, but he also felt that he was reaping what he sowed. Back then, he had said those disrespectful words to Xiaoqing, and even tried to cough. Now he was begging her. "Captain Xiao, I know I was wrong. If you're willing to help me, I'll give it to you." Tang Tianda gritted his teeth and said. Xiaoqing was actually not interested, but she still said lazily, "What is it?" "Mangosteen, cherries, mangoes, lychees, guavas. As long as it's a fruit you want to eat, I can grow it. It's the same for vegetables." Tang Tianda gritted his teeth. He was indeed a waste. He had a wood ability. He had just reached level 3. But he could become a senior in the Chinatown survivor base. It was not because he was Tang Yaozu's son, but because of his special ability. Chapter 537. Many fruits and vegetables went extinct after the doomsday because they were too delicate and couldn't withstand the harsh environment after the doomsday. Even if they were planted in artificial greenhouses, they couldn't survive. However, these fruits and vegetables were no problem in Tang Tianda's hands. The mangosteens that Xiaoqing bought were planted by Tang Tianda. It was all related to his superpower. Therefore, whenever someone in the base found a high-level zombie nuclei that could help with superpower users, they would give them to Tang Tianda. However, a loser was a loser. His ability to absorb nuclei was particularly poor. He had a pile of nuclei but couldn't absorb them. That was why he was only at level 3, and he barely reached it. Even if he was only at level 3, Tang Tianda was still a treasure in the Chinatown survivor base. Xiaoqing bit her nails and suddenly felt that she had picked up something good. She had always wanted to open up a planting area in Jiang City and grow all the things that her friends wanted to eat. However, many of them couldn't be grown because they were almost extinct. Even if they weren't extinct, after mutation, ordinary people couldn't eat them. It didn't matter what she and Air Dai ate. After all, even if they ate mutated plants, nothing would happen. However, Yan Hanqing and the others were different. She was worried about this matter, and Tang Tianda came to her door. This was like a pie falling from the sky when she was hungry. I can promise you, but I have a condition. Xiaoqing stretched out a finger. After thinking for a long time, she stretched out a second finger. The corner of Tang Tianda's mouth twitched, and then he said, "Say it. If I really save you and your father, I won't ask for anything else. You come to my base and plant things for me. You have to be at my beck and call," Xiaoqing said with a serious face. After that she said, "I also want some seeds." Tang Tianda gritted his teeth. "Deal. As long as you can help me, not to mention being at your beck and call, I'll even be your follower." "Okay." Xiaoqing nodded with a smile. She had picked up a follower who could plant anything. Tang Tianda felt a chill run down his spine and couldn't help but shiver. Xiaoqing raised her finger, and a vine that was thinner than her pinky immediately grew out of her fingertip. She handed the vine to Tang Tianda and said, "Take this thing. When you go back, secretly put a part of it on your father, and the other part on yourself. If you are in danger, the vine will instantly form a shield to help you block a fatal blow, and then I will teleport over." This was a new ability she comprehended. It was related to space, and was very similar to fixed-point teleportation. The only difference was that the place she wanted to teleport to must be a place she had been to before, and left a spatial imprint. She had left a spatial imprint on the vine, so she could teleport over when the time came. Of course, if the distance was too far, she would not be able to do it. For example, from Country M to the Celestial Empire. Otherwise, she could leave her coordinates in Jiang City and go back every night to see her cute baby. "Thank you." Tang Tianda was very grateful. He hurriedly said, "If you need anything in the future, just let me know." Then he patted his chest loudly. Xiaoqing just smiled and asked, "Do you want to stay for dinner?" Tang Tianda recalled that Xiaoqing wanted to make zhajiang noodles. He salivated. "Yes." Xiaoqing was expressionless. "Can't you tell that I'm just being polite? What I mean is I'm going to cook. Why are you still here?" Tang Tianda. QQ. Then he left. After he left, Xiaoqing rolled up her sleeves and gave Air Dai a loving kiss. Then she said, "Air Dai, sit here obediently and eat the mangosteen. I'm going to cook." Air Dai sat on the sofa obediently and ate the mangosteen. As he ate, the darkness in his eyes seemed to disperse and became more and more intense. "Is it time again?" Chapter 538. There was something wrong with his body. At first, he thought that he had returned to normal, but later on, he realized that he hadn't. Every time the sun rose, he would fall into a deep sleep. At this time, he would become that normal Air Dai. When night fell, he would wake up and become Fu Jingshan. At first, Fu Jingxian believed that Air Dai was just an abnormal personality. When he returned to normal, Air Dai would disappear. But later on, he realized that things weren't like that. Air Dai and him were more like the same soul that had split into two halves. If this continued, wouldn't it be like he had a split personality? Just as Fu Jingxian was holding the mangosteen in a daze, Xiaoqing had finished making the zhajiangmian noodles. She brought it out. The snow-white noodles were covered with meat sauce, and it looked especially appetizing. "You're not allowed to eat it. Wait until I'm done with the other dishes," Xiaoqing instructed Fu Jingxian before returning to the kitchen to continue cooking. Fu Jingxian stared blankly at the zhajiangmian noodles. After a while, an indescribable feeling welled up in his heart. He used to look forward to having a family like this. Someone would wash his hands and make soup for him. He would be tired after a day of hard work outside, and when he returned home, he would be able to eat hot soup and hot dishes. He would sit on the sofa and read the newspaper. She would stick her head out of the kitchen and playfully ask him, "What porridge do you want to eat tonight? Vegetable porridge or century egg and lean meat porridge?" That would be the most perfect life. Then, after he had lost all hope, he would be able to obtain everything he had dreamed of and even more. He didn't have to rack his brains to think about how to deal with those ill-intentioned relatives, or how to deal with his stepmother and stepbrother, who were constantly thinking about killing him. Someone was willing to protect him. He didn't have to do anything or think about anything. Fu Jingxian's heart was in a mess. He unconsciously picked up his chopsticks and started tasting the zhajiangmian noodles. By the time he realized what he was doing, he had already eaten half of the zhajiangmian noodles. Fu Jingxian's face was expressionless, but his heart was filled with curses. Xiaoqing had asked him to wait, but he actually ate it secretly. Fu Jingxian, who had a guilty conscience, secretly piled the sauce on top of the noodles to cover up the traces of the noodles being eaten. In order to make the noodles look as if they had been eaten, he racked his brains and even evenly distributed the noodles that belonged to Xiaoqing in the other bowl. In this way, the two bowls were more or less the same. "I was really too witty." Fu Jingxian was secretly proud of himself. After feeling proud of himself, Fu Jingxian wanted to slap himself. Had he been affected by Air Dai? He felt like a real idiot, be it his behavior or his mentality. Fu Jingxian, who felt as if he had been hit hard, stared at the two bowls of noodles in silence until Xiaoqing finished cooking and called him over to help. It was only then that Fu Jingxian crawled out of his stupor and obediently went over to serve the dishes. Although it was only the two of them eating, Xiaoqing still made 4 dishes and 1 soup. It was just that the portions of each dish weren't that big. This way, even if the two of them ate 4 dishes and 1 soup, it wouldn't be a waste. "Drink more soup. This soup is very delicious." Xiaoqing sat on the sofa. After picking up her chopsticks, she realized that the portion of the noodles in her bowl was a little wrong. She was stunned for a moment, then smiled but didn't say anything. Fu Jingxian, on the other hand, felt extremely guilty. While eating, he kept putting food into Xiaoqing's bowl. Xiaoqing was extremely happy. She felt that she had really been hallucinating these 2 days. Air Dai was clearly still so silly. After eating secretly, he didn't even wipe his mouth. Wasn't he just waiting to be caught? Chapter 539. Fu Jingxian's heart was filled with bitterness. He had always thought that he was Air Dai, the man that Xiaoqing loved. The reason why he didn't tell Xiaoqing that he had regained his memories was because he was inexplicably afraid. However, Xiaoqing told him that he wasn't the man she cared about. He clenched his teeth and said in a flustered tone, "Ah, Qing." As he spoke, his eyes were filled with confusion, as though he really didn't know anything. Xiaoqing's eyes were filled with confusion. She tore open Fu Jingxian's clothes and carefully observed him. The familiar scars on his chest, one after another, overturned her guess. Xiaoqing touched the scars with her fingertips. Not only did they look familiar, but they also felt familiar to the touch. Xiaoqing was confused. Was she wrong? Was it because Dumbo could speak and was a little smarter after the breakthrough, so he behaved differently from usual? Then what was with his answer? Xiaoqing didn't know how shocked and disbelieving Fu Jingxian was right now. He couldn't help but reach out and touch his private part. Then his face was filled with despair. He couldn't get it up. Xiao Qing, who was deep in thought, also noticed his actions. Now, she completely believed that Fu Jingxian was air dye because air dye were zombies. Couldn't get it up. Cough cough. This was normal. She couldn't help but pull open Fu Jingxian's pants to take a look. After confirming, she helplessly let go and hugged Fu Jingxian. I'm sorry. I keep feeling that you've been a little strange for the past 2 days. You're not like yourself anymore. Fu Jingxian was completely dumbfounded. He didn't even care about the warm and fragrant woman in his arms. He only clutched his belt tightly. He felt that after marrying a wife and regaining his memories, he was about to reach the peak of his life. Then God played the biggest joke on him. Xiao Qing thought Fu Jingxian was frightened, so she carried him upstairs and said softly, "Baby, I was wrong. Don't be afraid. Let's go to bed." When she crawled into bed, she even gently kissed the corner of Fu Jingxian's eyes. It'll get better. When you broke through in the past, weren't you able to do that too? That means you're not impotent, but just limited by your body. Maybe you'll be fine after you break through level 9. Fu Jingxian felt comforted and nestled in Xiao Qing's arms. The complicated feelings in his heart were gradually appeased. He could also sense that his current situation was very abnormal. He only had vague fragments of air dye's memories. His memories and air dye's were the same. They were supposed to be one soul, a complete person, but now they had been split into 2, each with their own consciousness. That was why half of them would take the initiative during the day, and most of them would take the initiative at night. Let's sleep. After Xiao Qing comforted her husband, she closed her eyes and went to sleep. Fu Jingxian, on the other hand, couldn't fall asleep. He kept his eyes open the entire night, looking at Xiao Qing, because he knew that he would fall asleep when the day came. The next day, Xiao Qing had just crawled out of bed and was about to prepare something to eat when someone knocked on the door. Xiao Qing lazily crawled to open the door. When she saw that it was Zhu Machin, she said, "Didn't you go to see the current ruler of country M? Why are you back so soon? Things like talking are left to the civil servants. We just have to wait." Zhu Machin laughed and said. After discussing it, the 2 sides decided to form a small team to search for the source of the insect plague. "When are we leaving?" Xiao Qing asked in a low voice. "This afternoon," Zhu Machin said. "We need to meet up with the people on the other side, and then discuss other things." "Okay." Xiao Qing nodded. "I'm just about to make dinner. Do you want to eat together?" "Okay." Zhu Machin immediately entered the room and sat on the sofa to wait. The corner of Xiao Qing's mouth twitched. She said helplessly, "Wait for me for a bit. I'll take care of the dishes first." Zhu Machin immediately said, "Take your time. I'm not in a hurry." Xiao Qing could only make porridge for 3 people. 1 porridge with lean meat and 1 porridge with spinach. After they finished eating, Xiao Qing sent Zhu Machin away first. Then, she took air dye to find Tang Tianda and gave him some instructions. She definitely had to join this small team. If something happened to Tang Tianda and his father once she left, distant water definitely wouldn't be able to save a nearby fire. She couldn't teleport over so far. So before she left, she had to tell Tang Tianda not to go out as much as possible and to keep a low profile. The thing she was worried about wouldn't happen so soon. Even if it happened, it was most likely to happen before they left country M. But it was better to be safe than sorry. If such a good little brother like Tang Tianda died, where would she go to cry? Chapter 540. After instructing her subordinates, Xiao Qing brought the air dye to find Zhu Machin and meet up with the others. At this time, Xiao Qing discovered that there were a few foreigners with blonde hair and blue eyes in the group. This should be the person sent by the M Nation. Xiao Qing wasn't interested in them. She held a bag of dried strawberries and leaned against the air dye. Occasionally, she would feed the air dye and eat one herself. She looked very relaxed. After everyone was gathered, they prepared to leave. Although Xiao Qing wasn't interested in the foreigners, she was still interested in where they were going. She pricked up her ears and listened. The few of them chatted. This time, they were going to investigate the Zerg's nest. It was the place where the Zerg had first appeared. It was definitely very dangerous to go there. They didn't know when they would die in a certain place. Therefore, several foreigners emphasized, if you are afraid of death, don't go. Don't talk about leaving when you get there. Xiaoqing stuffed a dried strawberry into the air-die's mouth and yawned. By the time they set off, it was already half an hour later. After all, these people were too chatty. The leader was a young foreigner with a scar on his face. It was said that he was the only person who had come out alive after exploring the Zerg's nest. He was the most familiar with the place, so he was the leader this time. There was still a long way to go from here to the Zerg's nest. It would take about 7 to 8 days to walk. These 7 to 8 days were used to hone their teamwork. Xiaoqing didn't think that they would be able to hone their teamwork. After all, the Chinese believed that those who weren't of the same race had different intentions. As for the foreigners, they obviously looked down on them. Both sides had their own thoughts. It would be strange if they could hone their teamwork. Xiaoqing didn't care about these things. She was thinking about her baby and her man. Humans were very strange creatures. Take her for example. She used to be the one who wasn't afraid of death. Every time she was on a mission, she would rush to the front lines. When she accepted a mission, she would also accept the most difficult and dangerous ones. Later on, she had a baby and a lover, so she started to soften and become more apprehensive. This was reflected in the fact that she began to consider more things instead of blindly rushing forward and risking her life. This was probably the legendary maturity. At night they set up camp. Because they didn't have enough tents, they had to squeeze in 4 or 5 people. Xiaoqing wouldn't squeeze in a tent with others. After setting up the tent, she went in with their dye. Those who were familiar with her didn't dare to say anything. After all, Xiaoqing's status and strength were all there. Everyone knew how cruel she was. However, the group of foreigners didn't know that. One of the blonde girls pointed at Xiaoqing's tent with dissatisfaction and said, "Why can the two of them sleep in the same tent?" Wu Jiaojiao said lazily, "Xiaoqing brought that tent with her. She always brings it with her wherever she goes. Regardless of whether it's accommodation or meals, she's always alone and doesn't count as part of the team." Another foreigner immediately frowned and said, "Oh God, she doesn't have any team spirit. We are a team. How can she count alone?" The civilian staff stayed in the Chinatown survivor base. After all, their abilities were very low. Some of them were even ordinary people who weren't suitable for fighting. Therefore, the people who stayed were all paranormals who were familiar with Xiaoqing's glorious history. Almost all of them had participated in the bloodbath in Jingdu. Now, when they looked at Xiaoqing, they were a little scared, although no one would provoke Xiaoqing. Chapter 541. At the same time, they also wanted to see this group of arrogant foreigners hit Xiaoqing's knife. This territory belonged to the foreigners, so this group of foreigners all had their noses pointed to the sky and were very arrogant. When this small team was first formed, the blonde with big breasts actually ran over to Wu Jiaojiao and asked, "Is it true that people in the Celestial Empire can't afford instant dumplings? Do you really not wash your hands after going to the toilet? You even urinate on the street?" At that time, Wu Jiaojiao wanted to throw this woman into a group of wild dogs in heat. What the hell? However, their every move would affect diplomacy. That was why no one stood out to beat up this group of arrogant foreigners. To be honest, in terms of superpowers, they really looked down on this group of foreigners, not to mention Xiaoqing. Wu Jiaojiao prayed in her heart, "Hurry up and go find Xiaoqing. You'd better have a bad attitude." She really wanted to see Xiaoqing slap their faces. Living up to her expectations, this group of people really went to find Xiaoqing. The leader was the blonde woman. She was obviously very arrogant, probably because she had been spoiled. She walked to Xiaoqing's tent and reached out to lift the curtain. As soon as the curtain was lifted, a big flower stretched out. The huge flower was very beautiful, but when it opened its petals, it revealed sharp thorns like sharp teeth. The blonde woman was startled and subconsciously released her superpower. Coincidentally, she was also a wood superpower possessor. What she released was a jade white flower. This was the strongest plant she had. It was already a level 4 mutated plant. Then it was swallowed by the big flower. The key point was that after being swallowed by the big flower, the big flower didn't even burp. It just shook its petals, exhaled a faint fragrance, and finally spat out some residue. If it had a mouth, the big flower would probably directly say, "What the hell is this? It's just trash." The only thing worth mentioning was that its effect was similar to toothpaste. Who would have thought that the thing that was eaten as toothpaste was actually the blonde's strongest move? She was dumbfounded at that time. She opened her mouth and stared at the big flower. She had never seen such an awesome man-eating flower. In her memory, wasn't the man-eating flower a kind of flower that relied on its stench to attract insects and then devoured them? She had also seen some mutated man-eating flowers, but she had never seen such an awesome one. The big flower guarding the door shook its head. Master said that no one was allowed to enter. She was doing something embarrassing inside. If anyone tried to force their way in, it could have a taste first. What arms and legs! He could eat as much as he wanted, as long as he was alive. Dehua expressed that it listened to its master the most. If its master told it to eat an arm, it would definitely not eat a leg. If its master told it to eat a bite, it would definitely not eat 2 bites. With that thought in mind, the big flower stuck out its head and sniffed the smell of the blonde man in a very human-like manner. Then it shook its leaves, indicating that it didn't smell good. A sprinkle of pepper and more salt would probably make it taste much better. Dehua was seriously considering whether or not he should ask his master to help him cook it before eating it. It was the first time that he had eaten a foreigner. The blonde man looked at Dehua and was a little frightened. After all, Dehua was really too ferocious. It was normal that she couldn't handle it. It wasn't until the person beside her reminded her that she remembered what she was here for. Suddenly she was a little embarrassed and angry, and she shouted, "Miss Xiao, are you inside?" Xiao Qing was kissing Air Dai. Although because of Air Dai, they couldn't do many things beyond friendship now, they could still touch and kiss. Chapter 542. After all, she was the only one in this group who didn't work for the government. She could be a little more willful and do whatever she wanted. She didn't need to consider the consequences of her actions at all. To put it bluntly, she had the power to be willful. But even if Wu Jiaojiao and the others didn't have any ill intentions, Xiao Qing didn't like the feeling of being used as a tool. She was actually very petty. It was never too late for a gentleman to take revenge, but a woman like her would take revenge from morning till night. Thus, when she was cooking, she deliberately let the aroma of the food waft out. She even stood in the direction of the wind, so that the aroma could follow the wind and float into everyone's nostrils. Aside from Zhu Machin, Wu Jiaojiao and the others all had looks of despair on their faces. Offending the great demon king wouldn't end well. Jin Mingyu's nose twitched, and his face was full of desire. "I smell the aroma of chicken stewed with mushrooms. There's also lettuce stir-fried with meat, and bamboo shoots stir-fried with meat. Could this smell be braised rabbit head?" Wu Jiaojiao was drooling at his words. "If I could have a bowl of white rice with these dishes." "No. 1 bowl of white rice is far from enough. At least 5 bowls. Then, Xiao Qing calmly opened the pot and scooped out the white rice. The rice looked especially beautiful. Every grain of rice was sparkling and translucent. When it was placed in the bowl, it piled up into a small point. When it was time to drizzle some vegetable juice on it and mix it a little, it would be very delicious. Wu Jiaojiao and the others bit their lapels and pulled at their buttons. They wanted nothing more than to cover their noses and eyes. Especially after seeing what Xiao Qing and the others were eating, they could no longer swallow the dry rations in their mouths. This was tasteless wax. The aroma kept drilling into their noses, making it impossible for them to eat the dry rations in their hands. Whether it was their eyes or their noses, they were all attracted to the smell. Wu Jiaojiao tearfully watched as Xiao Qing held a large tray with several dishes and 3 large bowls of rice. As she walked inside, she shouted, "Machin, it's time to eat. When you come in, don't forget to bring the pot of rice in." Zhu Machin responded and walked over. Under everyone's envious and jealous gazes, he brought the pot of rice in. Wu Jiaojiao stretched her nose, wishing she could follow the fragrance into the tent. However, the fragrance gradually dissipated, leaving only a faint scent in the air. Wu Jiaojia regretted it countless times. Why hadn't she been a step ahead of Zhu Machun and met Xiaoqing? Otherwise, she would be the one eating alone with Xiaoqing. Jin Mingyu pulled out half a bottle of Laogan Ma from his inventory. Then, he dug out some for himself and gave the rest to Wu Jiaojiao. This is all I have in stock. I usually use it to go with my meals when I'm out in the wild. I'll share some with you. Wu Jiaojiao, Kaki don't want Lao Godmother. I want Xiaoqing. Oh no, I want Xiaoqing's cooking. A few foreigners slowly came over. One of them whispered to Wu Jiaojiao. The person accompanying you is actually a chef, right? Wu Jiaojiao was speechless. What if Xiaoqing became a chef? She couldn't even compare to a chef. The three of them, who were eating alone, naturally didn't know what the people outside were saying about them. They were discussing business. I feel like these foreigners are unreliable. If we really go deep into the insect nest and encounter any danger, we can just leave and ignore the others, Zhu Machun said seriously. Let's not think about such depressing things for now. Xiaoqing picked up some food and gave it to him and Air Dai. The insect nest might not be as scary as you think. Zhu Machun only smiled. He knew that Xiaoqing was comforting him. That was an insect nest. The entire M country was helpless against the insects that came out of it. When the time comes, I can ask Dehua to protect you. As Xiaoqing said this, she smiled. She leaned against the table and smiled until her eyes turned into crescents. Air Dai quietly reached out and rubbed her stomach. Dehua was probably the nemesis of all insects. This could be seen from its previous behavior. Everything would be fine when the time came. What was there to worry about? Instead of worrying about what would happen in the future, it was better to think about what to eat tomorrow. After the incident with the blonde girl, the foreigners didn't approach Xiaoqing again. This situation continued until they reached their destination. It was a forest near a mountain range. It was said that they had found this place because they were exploring. In the end, they had almost been wiped out. That was why foreigners liked to go on adventures. It was commonly known as playing with one's life. Didn't they see that their entire team had gone into play? In the end, only one person came out alive. The person who came out alive was obviously traumatized by this patch of grass. When he mustered up his courage and walked in, the scars on his face tightened, making him look even more ferocious. First, he swore that he would never step into this place again. But now, he had broken his oath. After a few kilometers, we will be able to see the beehive. This beehive is very big and very dangerous. I hope that no one will act alone, okay? The lucky survivor said solemnly. He really didn't want to step into that nightmarish place, but he had no choice. For his country, for his home, he had to go back. As soon as they entered the forest, they could clearly feel that something was different. The forest was very quiet, and they couldn't even see a single insect. This was abnormal in itself. This forest could be said to be the source of the insect plague. There were no insects at the source of the insect plague. This idea was simply impossible. Xiaoqing thought about it calmly. The bees should be easier to deal with, because as long as they killed the queen bee, they could temporarily stop their reproduction. However, the bees would quickly produce another queen bee. Therefore, after killing the queen bee, they had to quickly kill most of the worker bees. The rest would need to be cleaned up bit by bit. The deeper they went, the more cautious they became. Amidst the silence on the second day, they finally found their first target, the beehive. Chapter 543. Those terrible insects were not only a disaster for humans, but also for other mutated animals and plants. Along the way, the whole forest was dead silent. There were only wreckages on the ground. The shadows of the trees shrouded the white bones. It looked very sad. The silent man with the scar on his face led them to stand in front of the huge hive. His voice was trembling. "It's here." He still remembered that his companion was swallowed and used as a host to lay eggs. He was bitten and eaten alive. He became a deserter and abandoned everyone. In the words of the people of the Celestial Empire, he developed a heart demon because of it. "I'll open the way." Wu Jiaojia stood up and said lightly. The blonde woman immediately said in a strange tone, "Guests from afar. How can we let guests explore the way?" Besides, things like opening the way should be left to the stronger ones. Otherwise, if everyone is led to a dead end, the whole team will be harmed. The man with the scar on his face had a better vision. He said calmly, "I'll leave it to you, Mississippi." The blonde woman's face immediately turned ugly when her own people didn't give her face. Wu Jiaojiao nodded, and a layer of water shield naturally appeared on her body. That layer of shield was light blue, and almost transparent. When it was on a person's body, it looked like a bubble, enveloping Wu Jiaojiao in the middle. Wu Jiaojiao's move had already shut the blonde woman's mouth. At least she still had a vision. She could see that Wu Jiaojiao was very strong. Wu Jiaojiao walked in. It was very dark inside the hive. Her whole body was emitting a faint light because of the shield. The people behind her couldn't see clearly. Jin Mingyu snapped his fingers. A cluster of colorful flames floated above his head like a small light bulb. Xiaoqing was more direct. She took out a lantern flower from her space and held it in her hand. The lantern flower emitted a pink light. It looked very beautiful. For a moment, everyone was full of tricks. The whole passage was lit up. Xiaoqing was a more attentive person. The first thing she noticed was not the bones on the ground, but the reflection on the walls of the beehive. She stretched out her finger and wiped it. There was a layer of something sticky on her finger. This thing couldn't be eaten casually. She couldn't taste it even if it was in her mouth. Xiaoqing sniffed it. There was a hint of fishy sweetness. At this time, she missed Yin Qiyue a little. If Yin Qiyue was here, she would definitely be able to solve her doubts quickly. After walking for less than 10 minutes, a buzzing sound came from the front. Xiaoqing stretched her ears to listen, and knew that it was the sound of some kind of insect flapping its wings. And in the beehive, there was no need to say more. Other than bees, there wouldn't be a second type of insect. "Those poisonous bees are coming," Xiaoqing reminded him. Her 5 senses should be the sharpest among all of them, so she heard it early. It was uncertain whether the others could hear it or not. The blonde woman had no emotional intelligence. Her dislike for Xiaoqing's group was written all over her face. When she heard Xiaoqing's words, she sneered and said, "Are you the legendary fraud? Why didn't I hear anything?" She didn't believe it. Wu Jiaojiao, who knew Xiaoqing's strength, believed it. Wu Jiaojiao was ready. She raised her hand, and a small and exquisite water ball appeared in her palm. Her control of water power could be said to be one of the best in the whole country. At least, there was no second water power user who could compete with her. Chapter 544. A minute of silence passed. Just as the blonde was about to say something sarcastic, a swarm of poisonous bees buzzed over. The smallest of the poisonous bees was the size of a fist. They flapped their wings and flew over from the end of the tunnel. Everyone's expression changed. The one with the worst expression was the man with the scar on his face, from the previous batch of survivors. The man subconsciously took a step back, then gritted his teeth, and didn't retreat again. Wu Jiaojiao raised her hand, and the water ball flew out. The water ball was like a bouncy ball. After touching the first poisonous bee, it bounced around the whole swarm. Her skill didn't hurt any of the poisonous bees at all, but it made all the poisonous bees wet. Then, she waved her hand and a cold current rushed over. All the poisonous bees that were touched by the water ball immediately became small ice sculptures and fell to the ground. The ice element was a variant of the water element. Logically speaking, Wu Jiaojiao should be an ordinary water element paranormal, but she had learned the ice element by herself. No wonder she was the boss of Thorns and Roses. No wonder she was the idol of all the water element paranormal. After the poisonous bees were frozen, they lost their ability to fight, and were easily dealt with. Under the gazes of the foreigners, Wu Jiaojiao raised her head proudly, and led her companions forward. Xiaoqing would warn Wu Jiaojiao in advance every time they were about to encounter poisonous bees. Then, Wu Jiaojiao would make a stunning move. In the eyes of foreigners, poisonous bees were the Grim Reaper. But in Wu Jiaojiao's hands, they were easily dealt with. It's too frequent. Xiaoqing estimated that this swarm of poisonous bees came and went very frequently. According to the season, it seemed to be the season for bees to lay eggs. In other words, it was the season when the queen bee needed food the most. No wonder this swarm of poisonous bees arrogantly went out to hunt humans. Because their queen bee needed a lot of nutrients and food to maintain the energy for laying eggs and hatching. When the queen bee laid eggs, it should be the most dangerous time for the whole swarm. They had made it in time. The center of the hive is just ahead. Everyone be careful. Xiaoqing said lightly. The man with the scar on his face also said, the queen bee should be in the nest. Can we really kill it? Wu Jiaojiao said, what are we here for? Now is not the time to be overly cautious. Let's go. Then, she took the lead and walked in. In the center of the beehive was a huge hall. On the four walls of the hall, there were small openings, and in each of the openings were poisonous bees. Poisonous bees kept flying out of the beehive. The huge queen bee dragged its big belly and laid on the ground. Its belly was so big that it couldn't move because it was time for it to lay eggs. The last time they came, they only woke up the sleeping queen bee, so that queen bee was more agile. At this time, the queen bee relied on the worker bees to eat. Its huge stomach wriggled, producing pure white eggs one after another. Then worker bees would fly over and carry the eggs away. These eggs had two hatching methods. The first was that the queen bee directly laid the eggs in the body of a certain creature. This way they would hatch quickly. After hatching, the young bees would eat the host and grow faster. The second method was the small openings in the wall. The worker bees would put the eggs in those small openings and seal the openings. After a period of time, the young bees would break out of the holes. Chapter 545. That's the queen bee. Wu Jiaojiao looked at the huge queen bee in a daze. After a while, she swallowed her saliva and said, it's really big. Someone will lead the team to clean up the worker bees, and someone will lead the team to surround the queen bee. This is the most suitable division of labor. Then the question is, who will be responsible for cleaning up the worker bees? And who will be responsible for surrounding the queen bee? Xiaoqing glanced around. No one spoke. Some people saw the current situation more clearly, such as Wu Jiaojiao. Wu Jiaojiao was very clear that the most suitable person was Xiaoqing, to lead them to kill the queen bee and leave the worker bees to the foreigners. But the problem was that some people always felt that they were the best, such as the blonde. So a disagreement arose. However, they had already alarmed the worker bees. If they delayed like this, they couldn't discuss anything and couldn't do anything. Do you think the queen bee is so easy to kill? Since you want to kill the queen bee, you can go ahead. We will be responsible for cleaning up the worker bees. Wu Jiaojiao raised her eyelids and said, killing the queen bee was the most dangerous task. They weren't willing to do it. It wasn't their own business. If they helped, they would have to look at other people's faces. Since this group of foreigners insisted on doing this job, they would let them do it. It was a life-risking job. Why did they think they were snatching it? Some of the foreigners' faces were a little green. They were willing to kill the worker bees. The queen bee was not easy to deal with. At least they had experience with worker bees. It would be easier to deal with them. But since the blonde had already spoken, they couldn't refute their own people. Moreover, if they refuted at this time, it would definitely make them look particularly cowardly. They could only bite the bullet and agree. At this time, the worker bees were already alarmed. With the queen bee's sharp cry, they all moved out and flew towards Xiaoqing and the others. I'll leave the queen bee to you. Everyone else, come to my side. Xiaoqing waved her hand, and Wu Jiaojiao and the others gathered. After everyone gathered, Xiaoqing raised her hand, and Guangguang appeared on the ground. The allies who were enveloped by Guangguang immediately felt that their bodies were full of energy. At the same time, Little Red also climbed onto Guangguang. It only came out to get some fresh air. The other one that came out to get some fresh air was probably Big Flower. When Big Flower was released, it was so excited that it spun around twice and stared at the worker bees while drooling. After it became a part of Xiaoqing, it was like a bottomless pit. No matter how much it ate, it would never be full. The more it was hungry, the more it liked to eat, just like now. It looked at the worker bees flying in the sky, and its saliva was like an open faucet, overflowing with corrosive liquid. You can eat to your heart's content today, Xiaoqing kindly said to Dehua. Big Flower was so excited that it kept shaking its leaves. It even ordered its little brother, Little Red, to get some for it to eat. The foreigners had already braced themselves to deal with the queen bee. They sat under the tree and took turns to deal with the worker bees. They couldn't be blamed for being idle, but Big Flower was too awesome. Big Flower stood on the ground, opened its petals, and began to emit a strange fragrance. Its little brother, Little Red, also stretched out its own flower and released the fragrance. Little Red's flower fragrance had the ability to cause hallucinations, and Big Flower's flower fragrance had the ability to seduce. The worker bees, who were originally very aggressive because the queen bee laid eggs, began to drill into Big Flower's mouth after smelling the fragrance. Big Flower simply didn't need to use any effort. It opened its petals, and food fell into its mouth. Wu Jiaojiao and the others were completely idle because they were not needed at all. Xiaoqing alone was enough. All the worker bees were attracted to them. The other side was more pitiful. They had just reached the queen bee's side when they were attacked. The queen bee was guarded by a group of high-level worker bees. Those poor guys were chased by the worker bees, and they all felt bitter in their hearts. They were all facing the worker bees. But why was the gap between them so big? Wu Jiaojiao killed the worker bees, as if it was a game, and the worker bees chased them as if it was a game. Xiaoqing killed the worker bees while sitting, and the queen bee killed them while lying on the ground. However, they asked for it, and they couldn't blame others. No matter how bitter their hearts were, they could only cry and rush up. It was not easy for them to touch the queen bee, but they were dumbfounded again. Although the queen bee's belly was white and tender, its defense was very high. Their attacks fell on the queen bee's belly, as if it was a game. They couldn't even see a white mark, let alone a wound. The queen bee immediately went crazy because of the pain. It shook its belly and rolled on the ground, almost crushing a paranormal who was standing close to it. The foreigners were speechless. They were not afraid of godlike opponents, but they were afraid of pig-like teammates. Chapter 546. One side was sitting on the ground drinking tea, while the other side was being chased by the bee queen. The difference was huge, and the foreigners could not take it anymore. One of them was slammed to the wall by the bee queen. He lay on the ground and shouted, friends from China, please help me. Now you know how to call for friends." Wu Jiaojia sneered and said, "What were you doing earlier?" The others ran until they were out of breath. They also began to shout, saying all sorts of words to admit defeat. In the end, even the blonde woman apologized. Although face was important, what was more important was his life. "I'll leave these worker bees to you." Xiaoqing left Guangguang and walked over with Dehua. Dai followed her. As soon as she took over, the foreigners ran over. Xiaoqing moved her wrists and said to Dai, "Use the worker bees around to block them for me." Dumbo nodded, indicating that he wouldn't let even one go. Xiaoqing smiled and handed Dehua to Dai. She jumped up and landed on the bee queen's back. The bee queen could feel that someone was on its back, so it started twisting crazily, trying to get rid of Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing calmly raised her hand. Countless vines drilled out from the ground and wrapped the bee queen like a cocoon. Only its head and tail were exposed. The bee queen had never been treated like this before. It was a level 6 mutant bee, but its greatest strength was in reproduction and defense. Its attack power was actually not very strong. It was scary because there were too many poisonous bees guarding it. However, because it needed a lot of energy to lay eggs, 99% of the worker bees in the hive went out to look for food. Therefore, it was an empty nest queen bee. No matter how powerful the general was, it was useless without soldiers. It could only be said that Xiaoqing and the others were too lucky. The bee queen's defense was very strong. But would it be useful against Xiaoqing? Xiaoqing easily tore open its belly. The white and round egg was exposed. The bee queen screamed in pain, and a special wave spread out. The small hole in the wall was covered with a thin layer of membrane, but it was suddenly pierced by black claws. Countless poisonous bees that were smaller than normal workers crawled out. They were all poisonous bees that had been catalyzed by the bee queen in advance. Xiaoqing easily grabbed the queen bee's head. Using her 5 fingers as a knife, She cut into the queen bee's head like cutting tofu. After groping around for a long time, she pulled out a crystal core. The crystal core was pink and shiny. The color was very beautiful. The queen bee that had lost its crystal core was naturally dead. The foreigners were dumbfounded. They had been chased all over the place and had almost lost their lives. In the end, Xiaoqing had taken care of it in a minute. The gap between them was simply too big. After putting away the crystal core, Xiaoqing did not stop. She took out the big white egg from the bee queen's body. It was a good thing and had high nutritional value. It could be brought back as a special product and let the few people at home taste it. After taking the eggs, Xiaoqing went on a killing spree. This was the first time those people had seen Xiaoqing killing spree. She air dye and Dehua were like a meat grinder. The poisonous bees came but did not return. Soon they were all killed. Xiaoqing clapped her hands and put Dehua away. She was not ready to leave. There must be a lot of good things in the hive. Naturally, she had to tidy it up before leaving. Chapter 547. After witnessing Xiaoqing's strength, the foreigners all fell silent. With Xiaoqing's strength, she could wipe out all of them by herself. They had nothing to say. Xiaoqing didn't care about them at all. She was sweeping the area with air dye and Dehua. There were many unhatched eggs in the small holes in the surrounding walls. There was also a blood pool where the queen bee was lying. It was full of honey. Xiaoqing said that all of this was hers. Who dared to snatch it? Did anyone dare to? She filled all the oil barrels in her space with honey. In the end, her small space couldn't hold it anymore. She waved her hand generously. The rest is yours. Everyone. One of the foreigners still had a look of disbelief. Such a terrifying insect plague ended just like that? Xiaoqing shook her head. No. Although we killed the queen bee, another queen bee will be born after losing the queen bee. However, it takes time for the queen bee to grow. In the short term, there won't be any more poisonous bees to harass you. Those people looked at each other. Their eyes were saying, "Oh my God, is there no way to solve it once? We can burn this hive," someone suggested. Then the remaining worker bees will go crazy. They will attack humans crazily without caring about their own lives. It will be another disaster then, Xiaoqing said expressionlessly. Everyone was silent for a while. They knew that Xiaoqing was right. They packed up and prepared to leave. They still had one more place to go. That was the place where the black beetles came from. As for the marching ants, they wouldn't stay in one place for too long. They were just passing by and accidentally participated in the insect plague. The black beetles were the most important thing in this operation. After leaving the honeycomb, the way everyone looked at Xiaoqing was no longer the same as before. The strong naturally had the treatment of the strong. No one would ask Xiaoqing why she had occupied a tent all by herself. And no one would question Xiaoqing for dragging the team down. What a joke. In fact, they were the ones who were dragging him down. After leaving the beehive, they did not rashly search for the next location. Instead, they found a safe place to set up camp and prepared to rest for a while before continuing on their journey. Xiaoqing had always believed that only good food and the babies at home could not be let down. Therefore, as soon as they set up camp, she could not wait to prepare the bee pupae she had obtained. Bee pupae could be made very easily. All he had to do was fry them in hot oil and add a little salt. The taste would be extraordinarily good. She ate one and found that the pupae contained a lot of energy, which was very helpful for her cultivation. Xiaoqing gave some to Qin Zishi and Zhu Machen. After the group finished eating, they returned to their tents to rest. Xiaoqing rubbed his belly, feeling very satisfied. The apocalypse also had its benefits. The food was more delicious than before the apocalypse. For a foodie, this kind of life was still very happy. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, he could hug his air dye and sleep. What else did he need? The next day they continued on their journey. Someone had investigated the source of the black beetles. It was at the bottom of a cliff at the end of the forest. When they reached the cliff, they borrowed Xiaoqing's vine rope to descend the cliff. The cliff was very deep, and they could not see the bottom when they stood at the top. After descending, they found that it was even deeper than they had imagined. They were like grasshoppers lined up on a rope, climbing back and forth until their feet touched the ground. The ground beneath their feet was covered with a thick layer of dead leaves, and there was a rotten smell. After all of them reached the bottom of the cliff, they began to walk forward. Wu Jiaojiao took the lead, but after taking a few steps, her expression changed. She hurriedly pressed her palms down, freezing the ground beneath her feet. At this time, she said with lingering fear, "Under the pile of leaves it's soft. It might be a swamp. Everyone be careful." She used her special ability to create an ice path and led everyone forward. As they walked, Xiaoqing suddenly heard a faint gurgling sound coming from under their feet. It was really a very faint sound like water boiling. She listened carefully, and then her expression changed. "Hurry up!" Although everyone did not know what was going on, they all listened to her and ran forward quickly. The last person had just run a distance when they discovered that something had drilled out of the ground and directly drilled through the ice. It was a huge purplish-black vine. There were bubble-like spots on the surface of the vine. It looked very disgusting. The vine was as thick as a person, and as it swung it broke the ice. The group of people hurriedly ran forward. As they ran, it was as if they had awakened the sleeping vines in the ground. Vines constantly drilled out of the ground. Not only did the vines look scary, but some of the vines, in the process of breaking the ice, were squeezed out of the bubbles, and immediately black pus dripped out. When the pus dripped on the ground, whether it was the dead leaves or the ice, it would quickly corrode. If this pus fell on a person's body, it would probably directly corrode the person to the point that not even their bones would be left. Everyone shuddered and ran forward with their heads down. Fortunately, this kind of vine would not chase after people. Even if it danced wildly, it would only stay in place. So as long as they ran a little faster, there was no danger. Wu Jiaojia ran at the front. There should be a swamp under her feet. She had to use the fastest speed to freeze a path. Otherwise, there would only be two results. Either they would fall into the swamp and die, or they would be hit by the vines and die. Either way, they would die. Under the pressure of the crisis, it was as if she had turned on a cheat. She continuously waved her hand and waved it again. A long ice path appeared under their feet. In order to conserve her ability, the ice path was very narrow and could only accommodate 2 feet. However, no one cared about this. They were all focused on running for their lives. If they ran too slowly, they might lose their lives. "I see land!" Wu Jiaojiao, who was at the front, suddenly cried out in surprise. The yellow land was not far away. As long as they stepped on it, they would probably be able to escape from these terrifying vines. However, the surprise only lasted for a moment, because in the next second, a huge vine suddenly appeared in front of them. The vine appeared in front of Wu Jiaojiao. If Zhu Machun had not reacted quickly and grabbed Wu Jiaojiao would probably have run headfirst into it. The consequences of running into it were self-evident. Pincer attack. Everyone was expressionless. This time, it seemed like they were really done for. Chapter 548. Thank you. Wu Jiaojiao gulped, her face pale. She had been so excited that she had let her guard down and had almost lost her life. "No need to thank me. Let's think about how we're going to get through first," Zhu Machun said expressionlessly. "I'll stop it. You guys hurry up." Xiaoqing raised her hand, and thin vines shot out, wrapping around the purplish-black vines. The purplish-black vines struggled with great force, causing Xiaoqing to stumble. Then Erdai pulled her back. Erdai reached out and grabbed the vines. Together with Xiaoqing, they restrained the purplish-black vines. Everyone else took the opportunity to run forward. The purplish-black vines seemed to know that they were going to run, and they wriggled furiously. Finally, with a crack, they broke Xiaoqing's vines. At this moment, most of the people had already run past. Qin Zishi was at the very back. Xiaoqing leapt forward, and countless vines formed a cage around Qin Zishi, trapping her within. Then, the purplish-black vines slammed into the cage, causing it to almost fall apart. Bubbles popped, and liquid flowed out, corroding the cage until it was on the verge of collapse. Xiaoqing didn't care about the purplish-black vines. The 2 vines were like hammers that struck the cage, and then directly pushed the cage to the safe ground. Once Qin Zishi was safe, Xiaoqing let out a sigh of relief. She glanced at Air Dai, and Air Dai immediately understood and leapt forward. At the same time, Xiaoqing's vines reached Air Dai's feet. Air Dai stepped on the vines, and his body rose once again. The purplish-black vines whipped at him, and Air Dai leapt into the air like a pigeon, landing easily on the ground. When Xiaoqing passed, it was probably the easiest. She disappeared on the spot, and when she reappeared, she was already beside Air Dai. Everyone looked at her with a hint of fear in their eyes. After all, an unknown power was even more frightening than a known power. Let's go. Xiaoqing pulled Air Dai. I'll lead the way this time. Wu Jiaojiao didn't say anything, because she was very clear that Xiaoqing's perception and other aspects were much stronger than hers. Moreover, her strength was also very strong. If there was any sudden accident, Xiaoqing would be able to react faster and better than her. Therefore, Xiaoqing walked at the front. Xiaoqing and Air Dai walked side by side at the front. The cliffs on both sides were very steep and looked a little scary. It was as if they were trapped in a narrow gorge, and it was terrifyingly silent. Even the crunching sound of the dead leaves under their feet could be heard clearly. Everyone hold your breath, Xiaoqing said in a low voice. There are a lot of poisonous fungi growing on the ground and the cliffs here. They will emit a very toxic smell, which is very harmful to the human body. Since Xiaoqing said that, they naturally believed her. Therefore, they all held their breath, afraid that they would really be poisoned. After hearing Xiaoqing's warning, they began to observe the surrounding environment. Then they found that there was indeed a kind of fungus growing on the ground and the cliffs. Its color was very similar to that of the rocks. Because its color was so similar to the rocks, there was no way to find it if they didn't look carefully. This kind of fungus looked like a layer of fleshy membrane. It was round and attached to the ground and walls. There were many small spots on its surface, and it emitted a faint smell. This smell was mixed with the smell of decay, so it was very difficult to find it. Thus, after exclaiming in admiration, they felt even more admiration for Xiaoqing. Chapter 549. Pay more attention to your steps when you walk. Xiaoqing said in a low voice. There are many animals living in this environment. Their skin color will be similar to mud and rocks, so we'd better be careful. Everyone expressed that they understood, and they became even more cautious as they walked. Xiaoqing was now paying more attention to the mountain walls on both sides. Some small animals with spots often crawled on them. Plants and animals were like that. There was definitely something wrong. This question was answered after they walked for a while. This was because they discovered a miasma. The miasma was very interesting. It was clearly floating not far in front of them, but it did not spread. It was as if there was an invisible barrier that prevented it from floating over. Xiaoqing asked, Is there anyone with fire power? Let's see if we can clear the miasma. The miasma was poisonous. If they went over rashly, they were likely to be poisoned or even killed. I'm a fire power possessor. Jin Mingyu stood out. Let me have a try. Xiaoqing nodded and stepped aside to let him have a try. Although Jin Mingyu was a very ordinary fire power possessor, he was able to become the leader of one of the top 4 mercenary groups in the capital, which was enough to prove his strength. He stretched out his hand and pointed forward. A fireball slowly took shape. The color of this fireball was a deep red. It looked very beautiful. After the fireball floated into the miasma, they could see smoke rising in spirals. Everyone covered their noses and didn't dare to breathe, because the burned miasma was also poisonous. Jin Mingyu was indeed one of the top mercenaries in the capital. He soon cleared all the miasma. Then, they were surprised to find that behind the miasma was a smelly hill. To be precise, it was a corpse. It could be seen that the corpse was a very powerful mutant animal when it was alive. It should be a particularly large gorilla. However, it was dead. After its death, the corpse even rotted, emitting gas that formed a miasma. It could be seen how powerful it was when it was alive. However, no matter how powerful it was when it was alive, it was just a corpse after death. Moreover, the corpse was occupied by black bugs and became their nest. Black bugs could be seen constantly crawling out from the corpse. They probably reproduced and lived in the corpses. With the help of the corpses, they formed a group. Xiaoqing couldn't help but gasp in amazement. She could tell that this corpse was most likely a mutated animal above level 7, when it was alive. Even she couldn't compare. I finally know why I haven't seen these black bugs since the end of the world. But they appeared in Country M. If I'm not wrong, these bugs were originally very few in number, and their strength was average. But they were lucky enough to find this corpse and use it as their nest. After this powerful mutant animal died, its crystal nucleus still existed. If I'm not wrong, it should be the strongest of these bugs that swallowed the crystal nucleus in the corpse, and is still digesting it. Xiaoqing rubbed his chin and said, "We're still early. If we were any later and it digested the crystal core, it would very likely rise to the 7th rank or above. At that time, I definitely wouldn't be able to deal with it." When the others heard this, they suddenly sweated. Level 7. In the whole M country, the strongest paranormal was just level 5. How could anyone deal with a level 7 mutant animal? They were really lucky to meet Xiaoqing at the most appropriate time. Otherwise, it would really become an uncontrollable disaster. "Just burn it," Xiaoqing said coldly. The interior of the corpse had been completely eaten. It was estimated that all the bugs were black. It was better to burn it directly. Jin Mingyu nodded and went forward to set the corpse on fire. In a few seconds, a tide of black bugs crawled out from the corpse. Dehua immediately opened its mouth excitedly, waiting for these little bugs to fall into the trap. The taste of these little bugs was much better than the ones they had caught on the coast before. Dehua was very satisfied with her meal. A rather large insect crawled out of the corpse. It looked different from the rest and had a pair of wings. While other insects could only run, it could fly. This should be the leader of them, Xiaoqing said after careful observation. As long as the leader of them was killed, the insect disaster would be solved. At that time, the insects would have no leader, which would be easy to deal with. Xiaoqing looked carefully. Her abilities were useless against these little bugs. Jin Mingyu's fire could burn the corpse, but it could not burn these little bugs. They eat abilities. Try not to get too close. Xiaoqing commanded Dehua to constantly eliminate the little bugs. This trip was all dependent on Dehua. Dehua was brave. After eating some little bugs, it was not satisfied. It stretched out its leaves and small vines wrapped around the largest black beetle. A bug and a flower began to fight. How did the bug and the flower fight? The bug at least had legs, but Dehua only had petals and leaves. When the big bug attacked, Dehua would twitch its leaves to fight back. Then it would find a way to swallow the big bug. Superpowered people could not participate in the fight, because these little bugs ate abilities. If superpowered people participated in the fight, they would be a meal for these little bugs. This made them even more powerful. That was all. The large flower was very powerful. It fought against a group of insects without any fear. Its petals, leaves, and vines were all activated. Many insects were directly knocked unconscious by its leaves, and then dragged over to be eaten. While the bugs were not paying attention, it directly swallowed the biggest one. After swallowing it, it closed the bud. Then, the bud kept trembling, as if the bug inside had been struggling. As the highest level bug, it would not be digested so easily. The petals of Dehua bulged a little here and there, and the bulges were wriggling. The big flower was shaking and shaking on the spot, as if it wanted to quickly digest the bug in its stomach. Xiaoqing's mouth twitched. She did not know why she was so worried that Dehua would fall apart. Sure enough, trouble came from the mouth. Chapter 550. After a while, the flower couldn't help but spit out the worm again. The worm was covered in corrosive liquid, but it was swallowed again in less than 2 seconds. Xiaoqing felt a chill run down her spine. It looked like someone had just finished vomiting and then swallowed the vomit. In fact, the flower looked like a fisherman who had caught a big fish. The fish would struggle, and if they pulled it up forcefully, the fishing rod would break or the line would break. They would constantly cast the line to let the fish swim until it was tired and relaxed. Then they would catch it in one fell swoop. As for the flower, it was letting itself rest for a while before swallowing and digesting. This disgusting scene lasted for 15 minutes before the worm was finally digested. Once the mother worm was digested, the remaining worms were nothing to be afraid of. Without the mother worm, although they could still reproduce, they couldn't give birth to new child worms. The worms that were born from the child worms would be weaker than the original. They would be much weaker in all aspects, and would no longer be invincible. After the flower swallowed the worm, it was about to break through. It was originally on the verge of breaking through. But because it was limited by Xiaoqing's level, it hadn't been able to break through. This time, Xiaoqing also felt the feeling of breaking through. Xiaoqing suppressed the urge to break through on the spot and said, "Let's leave this place first." What a joke. Breaking through here was courting death. The foreigners were in a state of confusion, because they were prepared to never return. Before coming, they had even said goodbye to their families. After all, they were going deep into the worm's nest. None of them thought about returning alive. They just felt that if they could kill the source of the worm, their deaths would be worth it. Then the worm disaster was resolved so easily. The few of them couldn't believe it. This was the worm disaster that had plagued the entire United States, and almost forced the survivors of the United States to retreat. How could it be resolved so easily? However, now wasn't the time to be in a daze. They were elites selected from the United States. If they didn't realize this, it would be a joke. On the way back, Xiaoqing demonstrated to everyone what strength was. She got rid of the vines blocking the way. When they came here, they wanted to preserve their strength to deal with the final boss. However, they didn't expect the final boss to be taken care of in just a few bites. Naturally, when they returned, they didn't have to avoid this thing anymore. Moreover, Xiaoqing was quite interested in them. After the vines were cut open, the meat in the middle was red with a hint of purple. It was smooth to the touch like the flesh of aloe vera. Only its skin was particularly hard. After removing the layer of bubbles on the outside, the purple-black skin was particularly flexible. Xiaoqing kept some of them. She could go back and make gloves for Gu Panpan. She was a strength type. Every time she fought, she would be barehanded. Although she was very strong, her hands would still be injured. With the protection of a pair of gloves, it wouldn't reduce her flexibility. It could also protect her palms. The rest of the vines were cut into pieces and kept. When they returned, they could be fed to the flower. Almost all mutated plants had a special ability, especially the flower that gained energy by devouring other plants and animals. If it devoured the vines, it would have a chance to obtain the corrosive venom in the vines to strengthen its own venom. After packing everything up, they left and quickly found a safe place to set up camp. Chapter 551. Dehua was currently at the 6th rank. It was possible for it to break through to the 7th rank, but it would be extremely difficult. If Xiaoqing broke through to the 7th rank, Dehua would break through as well. More accurately speaking, all of the plants on Xiaoqing's body would break through as well. Xiaoqing couldn't hold on much longer. As soon as the tent was set up, she had Air Dai stand guard. Then, she quickly went inside and prepared to break through. She first took out a few 5th rank crystal cores from her space. Although 5th rank crystal cores weren't very useful to her now, it was better than nothing. Then, she released her vines and had them take root in the red soil she had collected. The insect queen had swallowed the 7th rank gorilla's crystal core, and Dehua had swallowed the insect queen. In other words, Dehua's stomach contained a high-level crystal core. Once inside the tent, Dehua spat out the crystal core and held it up with a leaf as if it was a treasure. Then it handed it to Xiaoqing. Then, it used the leaf to hold the flower's head as it waited for Xiaoqing to break through. A 7th rank crystal core, and several 5th rank crystals. If she couldn't break through this time, she really didn't need to live anymore. Outside the tent, Air Dai also rested his chin on his hand, and obediently waited for Xiaoqing to break through. Anyone who tried to get close to her would be glared away by him. He couldn't let anyone disturb Xiaoqing. When the sky was about to turn dark, let alone Air Dai, even the people outside were getting anxious. They only knew that Xiaoqing was about to break through, but they didn't know what rank she was going to break through to. However, when they saw that she still hadn't come out at this time, they couldn't help but feel anxious. When night fell, even Zhu Machin and Qin Zishi couldn't stand it anymore. They came over a few times, but Air Dai wouldn't let them get close. They were so anxious that they stomped their feet. Finally, when the moon was high above the willow tree, the curtain of the tent was suddenly lifted. Xiaoqing walked out from inside. Originally, everyone was paying attention to the tent, but when Xiaoqing came out, no one noticed. It was not until Xiaoqing grabbed Air Dai that they realized that Xiaoqing was already standing outside the tent. How is it? Qin Zishi quickly jumped over. Xiaoqing nodded, indicating that she had successfully broken through. She was still a little shocked because after reaching level 7, she discovered some very strange changes. Her body was slowly regaining its vitality. Although this recovery was very slow, and the effect was very poor, it was still there. She couldn't help but think that perhaps the apocalypse wasn't the end of mankind. Nor was it the end of the world, but a new beginning. Before the apocalypse, Earth's ecology had been destroyed by humans. Countless species had gone extinct, and the environment was getting worse and worse. Just like the Ice Age many years ago, countless dinosaurs had died, and the dinosaurs that survived had evolved into other forms to better adapt to this world. The apocalypse was probably Earth's way of saving itself, but this world also gave mankind a chance. Mankind didn't go extinct, but instead evolved in two different ways. One was an ability user, and the other was a zombie. It didn't matter if they were superpowered people or zombies, their final form of evolution was the same. This didn't mean that the evolution of zombies was absolutely bad. Why did people feel that zombies were scary? It was because zombies ate humans, and to the world, humans were just one type of creature. There wasn't much difference between them and other animals. Therefore, what was bad for humans was just a balance for the world. That was all. If zombies and ability users evolved in the same direction, then zombies would no longer be the enemy of mankind. Think about it. Would a zombie like Xiaoqing, who had her own consciousness and rationality, eat humans? Of course not. Of course, there were some crazy people that were an exception. Could it be that there were no cannibals among humans? There were, and cannibals were more terrible than cannibalistic zombies. They ate humans because they didn't have any rationality. They were all manipulated by the desire to become stronger and the needs of their bodies. They couldn't realize what kind of behavior it was to eat humans. But what about humans? They were rational, and they knew that they were eating their own kind. Some people did it to survive, but most of them were really crazy. Zombies had begun to evolve in a normal direction, with wisdom and rationality. Later, they would be like Xiaoqing, and even their bodies would slowly recover. In the end, they would be no different from normal humans. Xiaoqing believed that when she reached level 9, her body would be the same as when she was alive. She had waited for this day for too long. This time she really saw hope. If it was really like what she thought, then her Air Dai would return to normal. It was just a matter of time. And little Bun, she was suddenly full of confidence in life. If there's nothing else, let's go back. Xiaoqing still missed her future follower. Of course, more importantly, after the insect disaster was solved, she was eager to go home. This time, she came here because of the insect disaster. She could also get a follower, so this trip was already perfect. Naturally, they didn't have anything else to do, so everyone packed up and went back happily. Only Qin Zishi came over and whispered, "Is it level 7? Xiaoqing nodded, and he immediately beamed. "I knew it must be level 7. That's great. You must be the first person to break through to level 7 in the world." Xiaoqing smiled and touched his head. "There's always someone better than you. Maybe there are many more masters who haven't appeared in front of people. I'll be laughed at if I say that. No, Sister Qing, you must have the most powerful superpower." Halfway through, he pursed his lips, because he just remembered that Xiaoqing was actually a zombie. But Xiaoqing really didn't look like a zombie. She was like a living person. No, she should be a living person. How could a zombie smile, talk, comfort people gently and save people? So he always felt that some people were blind. They never used their eyes to distinguish right from wrong. Were zombies always bad? Were humans always good? There was no such thing as right or wrong. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel wronged. Xiaoqing looked at him and couldn't help but touch his head. His hair was very soft, but it was a little short. It felt good to the touch. Dai suddenly jumped out and took Xiaoqing's hand from Qin Zixi head, then put it on his own head. He stared at Qin Zixi and said fiercely, "It's mine." Xiaoqing was amused by Dai's cute appearance. She leaned on Dai's shoulder and laughed until she bent over. Qin Zixi pointed at Dai and stammered, He can talk. He can be jealous." Chapter 552. On the way back, Qin Zixi was in a state of sluggishness. The zombies they encountered during the zombie siege were only human-like, and they used the ability to create hallucinations to sneak into the base. They couldn't speak, and they had no emotions, but Dai had reached the point where he could speak. If all zombies were like Dai, would there still be space for humans to live? Xiaoqing didn't know his worries, or else Xiaoqing would have enlightened him. Once zombies evolved to a certain level, it was very likely that they would recover everything they had when they were human, such as memory and wisdom. When zombies recovered their memories, they found that when they were zombies, not only did they eat humans, but some people also ate their families and loved ones. What would happen to them? Some people would collapse and be unable to accept such a reality, and some would probably be confused by power and make the best of it. But Xiaoqing believed that there were always more good people than evil people. Between humans and zombies, there was only a bridge of communication, a way to understand each other. One day humans and zombies could live in peace. Probably, after returning to the Chinatown survivor base, several civilian staff communicated with them country's top officials while discussing with Tang Yaozu about leaving. There were too many people leaving, and they needed to form a fleet, at least dozens of large ships, to transport everyone back. Tang Yaozu couldn't just leave as he wished. He had too many things to explain and too many things to arrange, so that after he left, the Chinatown survivor base wouldn't immediately fall into chaos. Tang Tianda still came to report every day, probably to gain favor. After all, he would be Xiaoqing's follower in the future. On this day, not long after Tang Tianda left, Xiaoqing suddenly noticed that the vines she asked Tang Tianda to place on Tang Yaozu's body were activated. Xiaoqing's eyes were cold, and she immediately said to Dai, immediately catch up with Tang Tianda, bring him back and protect him. I will be back soon. Dai reluctantly agreed. Xiaoqing activated the teleportation. Tang Yaozu went out this time to check on the ships that had been prepared. He tallied up the names of the people who would be leaving. Then, he went to check on the ships that had been built, to see if there were enough ships for everyone to ride, and how the quality was. After checking, he found that the number of ships was almost enough. At the latest, they would be able to set off tomorrow and return to his dream home. As a result, he was ambushed on the way back. This place was not far from the Chinatown survivor base. Tang Yaozu never thought that he would be ambushed in this place. This time, he didn't bring many people with him. There were only 2 guards and one in charge of the craftsmen who built the ship. Just as he walked to this place, someone suddenly came out from the ground and tried to assassinate him. He was caught off guard, and the people around him were caught off guard as well. At that moment, he really felt that his life was over. As a result, a vine shield suddenly appeared on his body, firmly protecting him in the middle. The assassin directly stabbed the shield and was bounced away. Tang Yaozu was stunned for a moment, and suddenly remembered that his son gave him something a few days ago. It was a vine with a pleasant color. He said that it was an amulet, but he didn't carry it with him. Although he felt that this thing was not reliable, it was his son's kindness, so he carried it with him. He didn't expect that it was this thing that saved his life. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.